Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Carol Maltesi. Carol Nicole Maltesi was born on September 19, 1995, in a small province in Italy, to parents Fabio and Josephine. Her mother was of Italian descent, while her father had Dutch heritage. When Carol was just 4 years old, her parents divorced, and she remained with her mother. Her father moved back to the Netherlands, where he remarried and had more children. Despite her father's lack of support, Josephine chose to stay in Italy and raise Carol on her own. Carol and her mother lived in a small community called Sesto Kenda. Her mother worked multiple jobs to provide Carol with a good education and opportunities for a better life. As a result, Carol grew into a beautiful, kind, and sociable young woman with many friends and an easy rapport with others. She was an active schoolgirl who participated in sports, such as horseback riding, and regularly attended a dance studio. Carol was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, and was an avid reader who could engage in conversations on a wide range of topics. As Carol entered her teenage years, she had many admirers and enjoyed being the center of attention. After completing her secondary education, Carol enrolled in a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion. During her freshman year, Carol discovered she was pregnant after developing a romantic relationship with a young man studying architecture and design. The pregnancy was unexpected, and both Carol and her father were unprepared. Despite the challenges, Carol decided to keep the baby. In 2016, Carol, then 20 years old, gave birth to a son. The arrival of the baby significantly impacted her life. Due to financial constraints, she had to leave school to support themselves and their child. She relocated to Verona in search of better opportunities to provide for their family. Carol found employment as a sales consultant in a cosmetics and perfume retail chain when her son was 1 year old. Meanwhile, her boyfriend worked on projects from home and took care of their son. However, in mid-2019, Carol's life took another turn when she fell in love with Angelo. They began a passionate affair, secretly meeting in hotel rooms and exchanging messages at night. The affair lasted for about 6 months, during which they tried to spend as much time together as possible. But just before the new year, Carol's boyfriend discovered her infidelity and decided to end their relationship. Carol thought it was for the best that she was leaving, as she had already planned to move in with her new boyfriend. However, they faced a challenge. Angelo lived with his parents, and Carol couldn't join him with her child from a previous relationship. They decided to rent a place together, but their plans were disrupted, which left them jobless and unable to afford a home. Carol had to move into Angelo's parents' house and temporarily leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father. Carol struggled financially, but Angelo and his parents supported her as much as possible. She had to rely on them completely, unable to contribute to her son's care. To make matters worse, her mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which required expensive treatment. In desperation, Carol looked for ways to earn money from home to support her son and ailing mother. She turned to social media and created a YouTube channel, sharing her experiences of life in isolation. Although her content didn't attract much attention, her striking appearance drew comments, including some unwanted and inappropriate proposals. A subscriber suggested that Carol create an account on the adult content platform OnlyFans, citing her attractive appearance and potential for quick success. Taking this advice, Carol registered under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel and began posting intimate photos and videos. She quickly gained a large following and started earning a substantial income. As time went on, Carol's content became more explicit and bold and was appreciated by her fans. However, she keeps her work a secret from her boyfriend and relatives. This secrecy was short-lived because an acquaintance of hers discovered her account about 6 months later. Although Carol tried to justify her work as an art form that gave her financial security and personal fulfillment, her acquaintances did not accept it. Friends and acquaintances gradually distanced themselves from her, believing that her work was immoral and fearing that association with her would damage their reputations. Carol saw this reaction as prejudice and remained confident that she would achieve success and wealth as an adult film star. Carol's newfound popularity attracted the attention of adult film studios, and several directors approached her with offers to star in their productions. She soon accepted the invitation and participated in group photo sessions. Unbeknownst to her, her activities went unnoticed, and her boyfriend, Angelo, was shocked to discover that she was not working remotely as a designer as she had claimed she would. He felt lost and didn't know how to react because he had no plans to end their relationship. However, when Angelo's parents learned of Carol's profession, they urged him to end the relationship immediately, fearing she would bring shame to their family. At that time, Carol achieved financial stability thanks to her popular OnlyFans account and increasing salaries from film directors. In interviews, she expressed her intention to eventually complete her education and pursue a career in design or modeling. However, she increasingly loved her current job and was completely immersed in it. Despite her success, Carol faced constant moral pressure from those around her, who judged and tried to shame her. This led to certain psychological trauma. She defended her profession, calling it art, and supported women's right to choose a career without fear of judgment or social consequences. At the age of 25, Carol moved to Rescaldina, a small town in the province of Milan, with the intention of starting again. She planned to abandon her career in the adult entertainment industry and secure a job as a sales consultant at a perfume shop. However, this job of hers only lasted for a short time. A few months later, Carol met David Fontana, a 42-year-old local banker with a passion for photography, especially nude photography. They connected online, where David was searching for photo models for his projects. Carol reciprocated his offer, and upon their first meeting, they felt an intense mutual attraction. Despite being married, David pursued a relationship with Carol and they began dating. Their relationship involved photo sessions that often led to intimate encounters. David soon discovered Carol's past experience in the adult industry and encouraged her to resume her career, citing her talent. However, David's feelings for Carol were complex. He loved her, desired to possess her, and also enjoyed watching her in adult films. In March 2021, David divorced his wife and moved in with Carol, allowing them to explore their most explicit fantasies together. He assisted her in creating content for OnlyFans, a platform where she gained immense popularity. However, David took a share of the profits from their joint work. As Carol's success grew, she began receiving lucrative offers from foreign directors and studios for film shoots. David was a jealous boyfriend who would become annoyed when others showed interest in Carol in public or tried to flirt with her. However, he never interfered with her work as an adult film actress, treating it as a normal job that she felt comfortable with. On the other hand, after Angelo and Carol broke up, Angelo confessed that he had missed her and asked to get back together, saying that he would accept her profession and not restrict her freedom. Carol appreciated Angelo's efforts but revealed that she had already met someone else. Even so, Angelo and Carol continued to communicate. However, when David found out, he became angry, threatened Angelo, and burned his car and finally broke up with Carol. Angelo reported the incident to the police, who issued a restraining order against David, but ultimately found no evidence linking him to arson. As Carol's career took off, Carol frequently traveled for filming and attracted a large following. She was trying to buy a house for herself and her son and planned to leave the adult film industry to focus on raising her son. To achieve this goal, she started creating custom videos for fans, who would send her scripts and pay her to make their fantasies come true. This idea brought high profits to Carol. Carol and David continued to work together in film despite their personal separation. During a September 2021 film shoot, Carol met co-star Salvatore Galdo, and a romance blossomed. She and Salvatore eventually formalized their relationship, deciding to get married after taking the time to ensure they were both ready to move forward. As they planned their future together, they made a conscious effort to maintain their independence and keep their relationship private. They had learned from past experiences and wanted to approach their new relationship with a clear understanding of each other's needs and boundaries. In the end, Carol and Salvatore were able to build a strong foundation for their relationship, free from the entanglements of their past. They were able to move forward together, focusing on their shared future and leaving their complicated pasts behind. Carol's social media activity had slowed down significantly. Although new posts occasionally appeared on her account, she rarely interacted with anyone, keeping her responses brief. Her latest photos suggested she had recently gone on a seaside vacation, but she hadn't shared her plans with anyone. Everything was happening peacefully. But on March 20, 2022, in a deserted area near Italian Borno, a passerby had made a disturbing discovery. He had been walking along a cliff when he had spotted large black bags of trash on a slope near a body of water. He had felt uncomfortable seeing garbage in such a beautiful location, so he had decided to throw it away. When he had approached one of the bags, he had noticed that it was unusually heavy. His curiosity had turned to horror when he had seen human fingers poking out through the tear in the polyethylene plastic. The man who quickly contacted the police, and when officers arrived, they found 4 bags with a human body that had been divided into 18 parts. Due to the extreme disfigurement, identifying the remains seemed unlikely. Forensic analysis showed that the victim was a young woman who had been deceased for at least 2 months, but the cause of death could not be determined. It was clear that the body had been stored in a freezer before being thrown off a cliff in a remote area, likely with the intention of remaining hidden for a long time. Upon impact, the bags tore, spilling some of the contents. The perpetrator had attempted to conceal the victim's identity by removing any distinctive features, such as tattoos, although damaged remnants of these tattoos still existed. The skin in those areas had been severely damaged with burns from hot objects, cuts, and acid. Despite this, police were able to piece together fragments of the tattoos and compare them with a missing persons database. A breakthrough came when a news report about the body was broadcast, asking anyone who might recognize the described features to come forward. Shortly after, a woman who worked in adult films visited the police station and identified the tattoos as belonging to a colleague who had disappeared in early January. The actress knew the deceased as Charlotte, but did not know her real name. This new information was crucial, as it allowed police to establish the victim's identity and real name. Once her identity was known, it was revealed that she had become engaged to Salvatore Galdo, a colleague, shortly before her disappearance. However, Galdo had not reported his fiancée missing, which raised suspicions. He was detained as the first suspect, but he appeared genuinely distraught over his fiancée's death and puzzled as to why he was under suspicion. According to Salvatore, he had been in regular contact with his fiancée through messaging apps and social media, and he had proof of their correspondence. He claimed that Carol had caught sick and was self-isolating, which is why he hadn't visited her. When asked why he hadn't called to check on her, he said he had spoken with David Fontana, who lived nearby and had promised to care for her. Although Salvatore's story was unclear and unconvincing, his testimony led police to a second suspect who needed to be questioned. However, before police could search for David, he appeared at the station to report a missing person. This was a surprising turn of events. David had not been following the news and did not expect the body to be found so quickly. When he learned that Carol's body had been discovered and identified, he became worried. But when Salvatore was arrested, David realized the police would likely find him, as he had communicated with Salvatore by phone and fabricated a story about taking care of Carol while she had sick. When questioned, David appeared nervous and gave conflicting accounts of his relationship with Carol. He claimed he and Carol were close, but they had not seen each other in months and she had suddenly stopped contacting him. After hours of questioning, David finally cracked under the pressure and began confessing that he had accidentally killed Carol, claiming it had happened in early January during a filming session for a client who had paid a large amount of money. The script had called for him to tie and gag Carol, put a bag over her head, and brutally beat and torture her with tools, including a hammer. David and Carol had agreed that David wouldn't hit her too hard, but she would act like she was in a lot of pain. However, David claimed he had accidentally delivered a hammer blow and fractured her skull. When he removed the bag, he saw that she was about to die, but instead of seeking medical help, he had decided to end her suffering with one last blow of the hammer. But surprisingly, the investigation revealed that the mysterious customer was actually David, who contacted Carol using a fake account. He had come up with a revenge plan because Carol had wanted to leave him. At about 9 p.m. on January 11th, David had used a hammer to kill Carol. The next day, he had bought a large freezer using Carol's credit card, as well as a saw and axe from a hardware store, which he had used to dismember her body. David had attempted to disfigure her body to prevent identification by removing her tattoos and skin and attempting to burn and shred the rest. After murdering Carol, David stored her body parts in bags and kept them in a freezer for over 2 months. During this time, he deceived her relatives and friends by communicating with them through her phone and social media accounts, creating the illusion that she was still alive. By the end of March, David thought it was safe to dispose of the body and dumped it off a cliff in a remote area. He hoped that the remains would either never be found or would have decomposed beyond recognition by the time they were discovered. However, the body was found just 2 days later, and authorities tracked David down within a week. The most puzzling aspect of the case is that none of Carol's relatives or friends reported her missing, despite her disappearance occurring nearly 3 months prior. They were all convinced by the messages and social media posts David had created, and even her fiancé, who thought she was ill, didn't become alarmed when she failed to answer his calls or visit him. If someone had raised the alarm, David would have been tracked immediately through the signal from Carol's phone, which he had kept with him the entire time. At the trial, David expressed remorse and claimed he loved Carol, stating that her death was unintentional. He also said he had planned to end his own life after her death, unable to cope with the grief. Although this statement seemed implausible, the defense maintained that the incident was an unintentional act of violence. On June 12, 2023, David was found guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison and ordered to pay compensation to Carol's son, Carol's mother, and the father of Carol's child, totaling €350,000. Notably, the court did not consider the manner of the killing to be cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not deemed an aggravating factor. As a result, David may be eligible for parole in the future. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Catherine Wells Burr. Catherine Wells Burr was born in 1989 in the United Kingdom to parents Phil and Jane Wells Burr. She has an older sister named Lynn. In the summer of 2010, Catherine met Rafael Novak, a 31-year-old co-worker, on a university break while working on a new vacuum cleaner production line. Rafael was an immigrant from Poland with a previous marriage and a son, had moved to England 4 years earlier seeking a better life. Rafael and Catherine started dating, initially meeting for lunch at the production site cafe, but soon progressing to romantic dinners. Rafael showered Catherine with gifts, took Catherine to movies, and went on walks with Catherine. As their relationship deepened, Rafael shared his past and reasons for moving to the UK with Catherine. Rafael's trustworthy nature allows her to open up completely to him. Within a few months, Catherine introduced Raffel to her parents, who welcomed him into their family and hoped for Raffel and Catherine's future happiness. Soon, Raffel and Catherine began planning their wedding. Catherine graduated with honors from Bath Spa University in 2011 and secured a promising job as a business analyst at Pneumatic International, the manufacturer of Henry vacuum cleaners. Her career progressed quickly, helping her have good job opportunities. Catherine is smart, highly educated, and has good interaction skills with others. She shows genuine interest in her co-workers' problems and cares for those around her. Her kind demeanor and radiant smile have earned her the admiration of her colleagues, who view her as a young leader. Catherine's career was advancing swiftly, and her substantial earnings, combined with those of her partner Raffel, allowed them to purchase a spacious home with a terrace in Willow Way. Although they were financially secure, they opted to take out a mortgage, securing insurance coverage as per their agreement with the bank. With their youth, successful careers, and love for each other, it seemed they had all the ingredients for happiness. However, the fateful day of September 12, 2012, marked a turning point in their lives, changing everything forever. On September 12, 2012, Orlando, a local resident, was driving home after a night shift at the gas station. He is in a hurry to take his daughter Maria to kindergarten as he promised his wife. While driving, he noticed black smoke coming from a nearby parking lot after turning a sharp corner. Smoke billowed from a car engulfed in flames. Orlando stopped and tried to get a closer look but couldn't due to the intense fire. When firefighters arrived 4 minutes later, the car was completely burned out. The police cordoned off the area to keep onlookers away. The location was relatively deserted due to the early hour, and there were no witnesses to the incident. Upon investigation, a charred body was found. The police needed to identify the victim and determine the cause of death. There were no signs of a car accident or any evidence of another vehicle being involved. The police initially suspected that the car may have caught fire due to a malfunction or self-ignition. A thorough investigation was conducted, involving multiple expert analyses. The remains were sent to a forensic laboratory to determine the identity and cause of death. The police also examined fragments of the burned vehicle to identify any malfunctions and establish the cause of the fire. The police began by checking the missing persons database and recent reports of disappearances. They quickly identified the deceased as 23-year-old Catherine Wells Barr. On the same day, Raffel Novak filed a missing persons report for his girlfriend, Catherine. According to Raffel, he left for work at 5:30 a.m. while Catherine was still asleep. When she failed to show up for work, and Raffel couldn't find her at any of her relatives' homes, he contacted the police. The investigation involved interviewing the victim's family, including her parents and sister, as well as Raffel, her colleagues, and friends. By gathering information about the last days and years of Catherine's life, the police were able to reconstruct the events leading up to her tragic death. The investigation into Catherine's disappearance continued to uncover shocking details about her life with Raffel. As the truth began to emerge, it became clear that their relationship had been built on lies from the start. Raffel, a 29-year-old man from Poland, had left his wife and child behind to escape his debts. He moved to the UK, where he met Anna Levick, with whom he had a long-term relationship starting in 2008. When Raffel met Catherine, he initially maintained relationships with both women. However, he eventually chose Catherine, believing she offered more stability and financial security. Catherine, unaware of Raffel's true intentions, genuinely desired a happy marriage and family with him. Meanwhile, Raffel was secretly planning to kill Catherine, intending to use the life insurance payout and the large house they shared to fund a new life with his mistress, Anna. The murder was carefully planned and executed with exceptional cruelty. On the day Catherine went missing, Raffel waited a few hours before reporting her disappearance to her boss. pretending to be frantically worried about her whereabouts. He feigned panic and despair in front of Catherine's colleagues and relatives, claiming she had been receiving threatening letters from a mentally unstable admirer. When Catherine's car was found missing and she was not at her parents' home or her own, Raffel's fake concern led Catherine's family to contact the police. Raffel recounted that the evening before her disappearance had been normal evening. Raffel and Catherine went for a walk, bought groceries, had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed together. Catherine seemed calm. However, a thorough investigation revealed that her death occurred earlier. She was strangled around 2 a.m., likely in her own bed while asleep. Her body was placed in the car, driven a short distance, and set on fire to destroy evidence. Raffel Novak had a solid alibi, as he was at work from 5:30 a.m. He claimed Catherine was asleep in bed when he left. The burning car was discovered between 6 and 7 a.m. However, Raffel was still at home at 1:30 a.m., which significantly altered the case's direction. As a result, Raffel Novak became the prime suspect in Catherine Wells Burr's murder. The evidence allowed for Raffel to be detained pending further investigation. Raffel claimed that Catherine was being stalked, which had caused her significant distress. However, during the investigation, it was discovered that Catherine had a secret online life. She had accounts on several adult websites, where she shared intimate photos and engaged in flirtatious conversations with men. A letter from a secret admirer was also found. Despite attempts to mislead the investigation, evidence was uncovered that proved Raffel's direct involvement in Catherine's demise. Notably, Raffel had a motive to kill Catherine. Investigators found that he had been in continuous communication with Anna Legwinowicz, and they had met regularly over the past few months. Furthermore, it was discovered that Raffel had a financial motive. Shortly before Catherine's death, they had both taken out life insurance policies worth £123,000. Raffel and Catherine were the sole beneficiaries of each other's policies, meaning they would receive the payouts in the event of the other's death. The main motive behind Catherine's death and the burning of her car to mislead the investigation was found to be a large life insurance payout. On the day she went missing, Catherine sent a message to Anna's phone. Additionally, security cameras showed Anna and her uncle filling a gas can at a gas station a few days before the crime. This new information brought a third person into the investigation. Anna Legwinowicz, 32, and her uncle, Tadeusz Dimitricin, 38, along with Raffel Novak, are suspected of being accomplices in a premeditated crime and arson to cover up evidence. The crime was carefully planned by them over several months. They created accounts on adult websites, uploaded doctored images of Catherine, and created chats with various men to mislead the investigation. When faced with undeniable evidence, Raffel and Anna couldn't deny their involvement any longer and began blaming each other. Raffel claimed that Anna, driven by jealousy, planned and carried out the crime to eliminate Catherine. In contrast, Anna accused Raffel of committing the crime out of greed, seeking to secure the insurance payout for the house. To avoid detection, the conspirators forged much evidence related to Catherine. They created fake profiles about Catherine on dating websites, portraying her as a promiscuous and highly sexual woman. Also, to cover their tracks, the conspirators burned Catherine's body and created a fake story about her. They invented a fictitious lover, and they believed that he might be responsible for Catherine's death. One of the conspirators even sent a text message from Catherine's phone to this fictitious person, suggesting that she was on her way to meet him. However, forensic experts discovered that when the fire broke out, Catherine was only wearing her favorite nightgown, not an appropriate outfit to meet someone. Despite the evidence, Raffel refused to acknowledge his involvement in Catherine's death. Instead, he told Jane, Catherine's mother, that her daughter was receiving threatening emails and text messages from an ex-boyfriend who said if he couldn't have her, no one could. Raffel also claimed that Catherine had spoken of taking her own life. In a shocking display of deceit, Raffel allowed Catherine's parents to comfort him, believing he was also mourning the loss of Catherine he loved. Raffel's acting was incredibly convincing. After Catherine's death, her mother, Jane, was so taken in by his performance that she hugged him and allowed him to call her mom. Jane explained that in the early stages of the investigation, the police viewed Raffel more as a witness than a suspect, so she decided to offer him her full support. Her reasoning was that if Catherine had loved him that much and he was considered part of their family, then he deserved their support. The trial, chaired by Justice Sharp, began and the jury heard that Raffel and his two co-defendants stood to gain a significant amount from Catherine's death. They hoped to receive a life insurance payout of £123,000 and half ownership of a two-bedroom home in Mangold, Somerset, valued at £137,000. During the trial, it was revealed that when police found Catherine's body in her burned car on the morning of September 12, Raffel showed no emotion. Anna Legwinowicz frequently shook her head and laughed in court when it was suggested she was responsible for the crime, but refused to testify. Tadevs also chose not to testify in his defense. The judge, Justice Sharp, told the defendants the murder was a horrific and merciless crime. The defendants showed no emotion during sentencing. The judge described Anna Legwinowicz's behavior as deceitful, manipulative, and cruel, and stated she played a significant role in the crime. He also told Tadevs that the murder was committed for gain, with many aggravating circumstances and no mitigating ones. The judge expressed deep sympathy for Catherine's parents, who had no idea that Raffel Novak's charming facade hid a monster. Raffel's actions were driven by financial gain, as he had no emotional ties to Catherine. Catherine's mother stated that the brutal and calculated manner of her daughter's death would haunt them forever. She regretted not having the chance to say goodbye or express her love, and now considers Raffel an evil person who deserves to spend the rest of his life in prison. Catherine's father, Philip, added that they had welcomed Raffel into their home, treating him like a son, only to be betrayed by him. During the trial, Raffel Novak became emotional in the witness box. He denied any involvement in the death of his girlfriend, Catherine Wells Burr. Raffel claimed everyone was blaming him for a crime he did not commit. However, the court heard that Raffel showed no emotion when the police discovered Catherine's body in her burned-out car on September 12 last year. Catherine's mother, Jane Wells Burr, testified that after his initial release from police custody, Raffel asked for a steak dinner and didn't even mention Catherine. Jane Wells Burr stated that her daughter's fate was sealed when she and Raffel bought a house together and took out a life insurance policy. She believes that in signing the contract, Catherine also signed her own death warrant. Ultimately, the court found Raffel Novak guilty of suffocating Catherine with a pillow while she slept. He had conspired with his secret lover, Anna Legwinowicz, and her uncle, Tadevs, to claim a £123,000 life insurance payout and a share of the house. Anna and Tadevs had transported Catherine's body in her car to a remote location and set it on fire. Raffel and Anna were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years, while Tadevs received a 27-year sentence. After the verdict, Catherine's parents, Philip and Jane Wells Burr, advocated for stricter immigration laws. They believed that if the UK had more stringent immigration rules, like the US, Raffel Novak would not have been allowed entry. Raffel had previously been convicted of assaulting his wife in Poland. Philip and Jane, who divorced after Catherine's death, blamed the European Union for the UK's lenient immigration policies. Jane stated that the UK does not thoroughly check people entering the country. She was unaware of Raffel's previous assault charge in Poland and believes the government needs to prevent individuals like Raffel from freely entering the country. Following the verdict, Catherine's mother paid tribute to her daughter, describing her as a beautiful, determined, and hard-working individual who earned a first-class degree from the University of Bath Spa. Catherine's family expressed their devastation and loss, stating they were proud of her accomplishments and had no idea how to move forward without her. They believed she had great potential and a promising life ahead, but it was cruelly taken away from her and her loved ones. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships with women. He had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school, eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree in economics. After completing her education, Michelle secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her, he immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention, and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell: she was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance, and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities, with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Brevard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate the event. As they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to comfort her friend. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006, when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend, discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left. Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel, claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken, and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body, with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll. And Jason's former mistress Michelle Money revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. This testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal grandparents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Georgina Simons. Georgina, an effervescent and determined escort, inhabited a world steeped in affluence and grandeur. Yet, beneath the veneer of sophistication and splendor, lurked a labyrinth of falsehoods and manipulation, ultimately leading to her premature demise. She was always fascinated with her appearance, and this preoccupation intensified over time. Seeking more space for their family, Georgina, Pete, and Emily found a small terraced house and moved in, enjoying a steady income and financial security. Money was not a concern for them. Pete found success working in the electric vehicle industry, while Georgina, feeling unsatisfied with her 9-to-5 job in the loan industry, sought alternative career paths. She confided in her friends, expressing her belief that the traditional 9-to-5 workday was not a good fit for her. Eventually, Georgina began supplementing her income by working as a burlesque dancer in a bar and later for an escort service. Both roles appealed to her due to the attention they provided. However, it was during her tenure at the agency that her life took a significant turn. In May 2012, at the age of 20, Georgina crossed paths with Peter Morgan, then 49, a well-to-do real estate developer who lived near where she resided. Peter led a life of affluence, happily married to Helen and a devoted father to their 2 children. His wealth originated from a multi-million-pound property portfolio, which notably included a stately windmill situated on a sprawling 300-acre estate that he shared with his parents and brother. Peter's childhood was marked by early exposure to farming equipment and machinery. By the age of 10, he had become adept at operating tractors and motorcycles. Opting out of formal education, he remained within the family business until the age of 34, indulging in a lifestyle where money was of little concern. Peter acknowledged a singular lapse in judgment, an encounter with a sex worker in Amsterdam, but otherwise maintained his dedication to his marriage. However, a perceived midlife crisis in his 40s led him to use technology such as smartphones to engage with sex workers through escort agencies. In his own words, Peter appreciated the transactional nature of his encounters, describing the appeal of being able to have sex, shake hands, and leave. However, everything shifted when he crossed paths with Georgina. She stood out from the others, unexpectedly captivating Peter's heart. Before Georgina, Peter had been frequently visiting different sex workers, with the encounters becoming weekly over time. While overseeing the renovation of a lighthouse for his real estate ventures, Peter showered Georgina with lavish gifts, including a Range Rover worth over $112,000 and an $11,000 shopping spree. He even paid her $1,000 for a single night together. Georgina enjoyed the attention and luxurious lifestyle, but exclusivity in her relationship with Pete remained elusive. She continued to see other clients while maintaining a romantic relationship with Pete. Unlike her arrangement with Peter Morgan, he harbored deep resentment towards Georgina's involvement with other individuals, despite their lack of romantic commitment. By 2015, he had persuaded Georgina to work exclusively as his personal escort, providing her with monthly payments ranging from $7,000 to $10,000. During this time, Peter was overseeing the renovation of his Grade 2 listed castle, including Castle Bungalow, a cottage on its grounds where Georgina relocated as part of their arrangement. She resided in the cottage over time. Peter confided in Georgina about his emotions and aspirations for the future. He decided to end his 22-year marriage to Helen, ensuring her financial stability while allowing Georgina to retain occupancy of the cottage. This turn of events left Pete's former partner and father of their daughter devastated, feeling as though he had lost the woman he loved. In August 2015, the couple embarked on a trip to Africa, yet Pete couldn't shake the feeling of Georgina slipping away from him. The thought of her being with other men, particularly someone as affluent as Peter Morgan, plunged him into a deep depression. Despite understanding Peter's ability to provide Georgina with a lavish lifestyle that made a strong impression on her, Pete felt powerless in comparison to Peter's wealth. Pete's mother, Lynn, reflected on this time, noting that at this point, Pete was happy to be with her, and he earned enough money for them both to have a good life and do what they wanted. She thought he put up with a lot, as she never knew anything else was going on. Morgan occupied a significant place in his life. He was constantly on his mind, and the feelings were intensifying within him. However, Pete cared too much about his mother to talk about these issues. On November 15, 2015, Pete Deem vanished following a heated argument with Georgina regarding text messages. Tragically, he was later discovered deceased by hanging in a wooded area. 2 days later, Alexei Butcher, a friend of Georgina's, succinctly summed up the situation. Rich Pete was completely smitten. He loved and cherished her, envisioning a future together. However, it seemed Georgina was only interested in him for his wealth. It is doubtful that she ever truly cared for him, even though she claimed to have left poor Pete for him. Her intentions were always to exploit Rich Pete for as much as she could before returning to poor Pete. Adding to Georgina's distress, she had lost her father to suicide just a few months before Pete's death. Despite the hardships she faced, it was clear that she genuinely cared for Pete, like many others did. However, she would have to confront the devastating realization that her own actions contributed to his untimely demise. The news of Pete's death deeply affected Georgina, causing a significant shift in her personality. She blamed Peter for Pete's passing and became increasingly intolerant of his obsessive and controlling behavior. Furthermore, she held Peter accountable for having to deal with social services regarding her daughter's well-being. Georgina publicly criticized Peter in front of his friends and family, which angered him. Peter was frustrated that even with Pete gone, he could not have Georgina entirely to himself. Later, he would recollect that Georgina had almost succeeded in terminating her own life by slashing her wrists in the bathtub. Peter recounted that she was submerged in the water and he pulled her out. Following the demise of her former partner, she was regularly consuming drugs and alcohol. She held him accountable for Pete's death, making him feel culpable and asserting that it was entirely his fault. Tensions between Georgina and Peter Morgan escalated further after Pete's funeral in December 2015, when Georgina began dating Tom Ballinger, a friend of Pete's. Enraged, Peter started taking Georgina's phone to read her texts. He had also planted a listening device disguised as a white plug adapter in the cottage, making a total of 514 calls to it, allowing him to eavesdrop on every one of her phone conversations. One night in January 2016, Peter overheard a conversation in the bugged cottage that shook him to the core. Georgina was confiding in Tom Ballinger about her scheme to blackmail Peter into relinquishing the cottage. She disclosed her intention to relocate to London, where she could pursue her escorting career and significantly increase her earnings from upscale clients. Upon hearing this, Peter's heart sank, grappling with the realization that Georgina might not be committed to their relationship. She issued dire threats of exposing damaging information about him to the public, convinced she could ruin him. Georgina alleged that Peter concealed $50,000 in cash at home to evade taxes and was involved in constructing buildings that failed to meet code standards. Furthermore, she claimed to possess evidence on her phone indicating that Peter engaged with sex workers while still married to his wife. After 3 years of dating Georgina, Peter was aware of the explicit photographs and videos documenting their participation in group sexual activities, as well as intimate moments in the marital bed at his residence. He also knew that Georgina had successfully blackmailed at least 3 of her former clients. The realization that Georgina posed a serious threat to his reputation and livelihood left Peter with no choice but to consider extreme actions to protect himself. Fearing the catastrophic consequences of Georgina's blackmailing tactics, Peter considered eliminating her as a solution. He carefully planned this by meticulously creating a detailed list of necessary items using the Notes app on his iPhone. On January 12, 2016, Alexei, a friend of Georgina's, contacted the Welsh authorities. Later that same day, Alexei and Georgina made plans for a playdate for their daughters. However, Georgina failed to arrive to pick up her child from school, as arranged. When the police arrived at the cottage, both Alexei and Georgina's mother were present along with Peter. Peter informed the officers that Georgina had been struggling recently, turning to alcohol and drugs to cope with the grief of losing her father and ex-boyfriend Pete. He expressed concern that Georgina may have harmed herself, speculating that she could be in the woods behind the home. Despite a search of the area, Georgina was not found. Due to her mental state, authorities classified Georgina as a high-risk missing person. In the end, Peter admitted to the police that he had intervened and taken Georgina's phone from her, fearing she intended to use it to arrange a drug transaction. Furthermore, information gathered from Georgina's family and friends revealed that Peter was deeply infatuated with her, whereas she viewed their relationship solely as a business arrangement. Alexei informed the authorities that Georgina had decided to terminate her association with Peter and was looking forward to the future. Peter was brought in for questioning after the police located the phone. After prolonged interrogation, he eventually confessed to strangling Georgina and burying her body on the property. Law enforcement officers found Georgina's remains concealed beneath farm machinery, bound with rope and with an orange string tied around her neck, indicating she had been strangled. Georgina's handbag, vehicle, and house keys were discovered discarded in the trash, along with her high heels. Additionally, the police uncovered Peter's listening device, which he claimed he had installed to ensure Georgina's safety. However, call logs for Peter revealed that the listening device had been utilized 514 times between 2015 and 2016. Ultimately, Peter justified his purchase of the listening device by claiming he believed Georgina was exploiting him. He alleged that he had overheard Georgina discussing plans to blackmail him into surrendering the cottage. Peter carefully compiled a shopping list on his phone as a reminder of the items he needed to purchase, which included a polytarp, a handle, snips, string, tape, gloves, a plug, and a bag, tools later used in Georgina's murder. Furthermore, the police obtained footage from the farm's security system that captured Peter's arrival and exit from the vehicle, as well as the concealment of Georgina's body. The authorities speculated that Peter was unaware that his wife had installed the cameras after his departure on January 14, 2016. Peter was formally charged with murder, and his trial began on November 28, 2016. During the trial, he pleaded not guilty. The prosecution argued that Peter's obsession with Georgina led him to meticulously plan and carry out her murder. In contrast, Peter's defense asserted that his Asperger's disorder impaired his ability to fully comprehend the consequences of his actions, which could mitigate his culpability. Despite testimony from 2 doctors, the prosecution's expert disagreed with this assessment. Ultimately, the jury found Peter guilty of murder on December 21st, and he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In October 2017, Peter filed an appeal against his conviction and imprisonment. However, the appeal was dismissed in March 2018. The unexpected death of Georgina deeply affected her family and friends, plunging them into deep grief. Her vibrant personality, now a treasured recollection, stands as a poignant reminder of a life cut short by this tragic event. The community came together in a display of unity, offering sincere support to Georgina's family and friends as they grappled with their sorrow. Their steadfast presence served as a powerful testament to the resilience that can be found in the collective strength of a community facing hardship. Though Georgina's life was tragically short-lived, her legacy continues to live on in the hearts of those who cherished her. May her memory inspire others to savor every moment and appreciate the preciousness of life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Catherine Nevin. 55-year-old Tom Nevin was fatally shot in his pub, Jack White's, near Arklow, in the early hours of March 19th last year. He was killed by a single shotgun blast to the side as he was counting the takings after the St. Patrick's holiday weekend. His car, which was driven away after the robbery, was later discovered abandoned at Dartmouth Square in Dublin. Today, members of the investigation team took Mr. Nevin's widow, Catherine, into custody when she was visiting Dublin. She was arrested in the Ballyboe area of the city at lunchtime and brought to the Bridewell Garda station, where she was charged with the murder of her husband and with soliciting others to murder him in 1989 and 1990. Shortly afterwards, she was taken before Judge Michael Canalan in the nearby Dublin District Court. Catherine Nevin, née Lee Scully, was born on October 1, 1950, in the small village of Nerney, County Kildare. Growing up in a modest 2-bedroom house with her brother and sister, she attended Presentation College, Kildare, an all-girls school run by nuns. Catherine excelled as a student, known for her diligence and deft hands. After leaving school, she invested in sewing machines and traveled the country, providing dressmaking lessons. She then ventured into the world of makeup, completing a beauty course and delivering lectures on makeup and presentation, where she demonstrated her exceptional teaching skills. Catherine's first significant employment was as a receptionist at the oldest hotel in Dublin, the Castle Hotel. Her colleagues described her as highly efficient, glamorous, and ambitious, with aspirations to establish her own model agency. At the young age of 21 in 1971, she met Tom Nevin, a regular visitor to the hotel who was 10 years her senior. Their romance blossomed, and they married in Rome in 1976. Tom was a relatively wealthy, shy and down-to-earth man, originally from the County Galway village called Tina. He was the eldest of 9 children and had a great love for sports, especially hurling. His easygoing charm, combined with Catherine's ambition, was a potent combination. When he married Catherine, he was managing his uncle's pub in Dolphin's Barn, Dublin. Over the years, Tom and Catherine went on to acquire and manage many properties around the city of Dublin, with Catherine being very hands-on in decorating the properties and collecting the rents. In March 1986, Tom and Catherine decided to purchase Jack White's pub in Britus Bay, County Wicklow, which is the setting for our story. They worked tirelessly, keeping the pub open from 8:30 a.m. until late at night. Britus Bay is a 4-kilometre stretch of beach on the Irish Sea coast, and the beach and associated dunes are highly popular with Dubliners, being one of the most frequented beaches by residents of the capital during the summer. Acquiring Jack White's pub and restaurant was a very lucrative move for the Nevins. However, this is where Catherine's true nature emerged, and her marriage began to deteriorate. Catherine was a bossy, bullying individual who was abusive towards both Tom and her young staff. While some may have seen her as a motherly figure, the general consensus was that she was a nightmare to work for. She had no qualms about belittling Tom in front of the staff and berating her young staff members, who would later speak out against her. An example of her pettiness was told by one staff member, where one night after closing, the staff and Tom were sitting around chatting and having a laugh. When Catherine came into the bar, she didn't like what she saw and confiscated the staff's tip jar, which was so petty and spiteful. Tom was affectionately known to the staff as Daddy. He was a gentle giant, standing at 6 feet 3 inches tall, and was caring and quiet. The staff loved him, and he would go out of his way to help any of them. However, Catherine ruled the workplace with an iron fist. One staff member reported that she was so strict and ruthless that her behavior bordered on inhumane. Kathleen, a cleaner on the staff, was told to come in early to redo rooms that she had already cleaned. At one point, Catherine asked the cleaner to work full-time, and when the cleaner refused, Catherine retaliated by contacting the social welfare officers and reporting that Kathleen had refused full-time work, thereby making her ineligible for government assistance. Catherine's actions were petty and vindictive. As early as 1986, Catherine and Tom were no longer a married couple. Tom slept in the staff quarters while Catherine occupied the main bedroom, openly entertaining male friends just doors away from Tom's room, a deeply disrespectful situation. Although Catherine had requested a divorce multiple times, Tom refused, as he had already annulled his first marriage, and his Catholic upbringing made him reluctant to go through another failed marriage. If Tom had granted the divorce, he might still be alive today, spared the years of humiliation before his staff, friends, and patrons. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine desperately wanted to end the marriage, making no fewer than 18 requests to have her husband killed. She stood to benefit greatly from his death, as she would inherit the pub worth 670,000 Irish pounds, their 2 Dublin properties worth $1 million at the time, and a 78,000 payout from an insurance policy, along with 197,000 Irish pounds in cash. Catherine was not only all I've said above, but she was also a bit of a gore, as we would call her here in Ireland. She had men left, right, and centre, with no shame, and she loved men in high-profile jobs. If someone high-profile visited Jack White's, she would fall over herself, as she was a bit of a sex kitten and used her sexuality to her advantage, with short skirts, low tops, and high heels. On Tuesday, the 19th of March, 1996, Tom and Catherine were to celebrate their 10th anniversary of owning Jack White's pub. It was just after Paddy's weekend, so the pub was extra busy. Tom didn't get the chance to go to the bank, and on the Tuesday evening, he was downstairs in the kitchen of the pub, counting the weekend's takings, while Catherine was asleep upstairs. According to Catherine, she was awoken by someone pressing her face into a pillow, and a man was shouting, "Jewelry, kill you," with a knife in his hand. Catherine was then tied up by her attacker. After a while, she heard two vehicles speeding away. She managed to get to a panic button, and the Garda arrived around 4:30 a.m. They found Tom slumped on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood with a gunshot to his chest, still wearing his glasses and a pen in his hand. He was surely dead. A sum of 13,000 Irish pounds, equivalent to €16,500 today, was stolen, along with Tom's car, which would later be found in Dublin City, abandoned. It looked like a robbery gone wrong, but despite Catherine's story, there were no signs of a fourth entry, and the phone cards had not been pulled out of the walls, but two were off the hook. Catherine's bedroom was in a state of disorder, but it did not appear to have been systematically searched, and jewelry had been scattered around, but none was taken. From the time of the shooting, it would take Catherine a total of 2 hours before she pressed the alarm button to alert authorities of the break-in. She would greet the Garda scantily clad and tell them she had been tied up with her own black tights, and her underwear had been thrust into her mouth as a gag. A guard of fingerprints expert found drawers discouraged on the floor, which appeared to have been lifted from the sides and placed on the ground. None of the doors and windows in the pub showed signs of forced entry. She had not gone to her husband's separate bedroom for help once she had freed herself. A witness would recall how on the day of the murder, Catherine had told staff they were not welcome to stay there that night in the pub, as they had often done after a night out, especially after a bank holiday weekend. While many of the circumstances seemed suspicious, and the Gardaí were confident they had their killer, there was still a lack of firm evidence, no forensics, no white witnesses, and no admission of guilt. Circumstantial evidence would not be enough to convict her. However, while they built their case, Cattram would play the grieving widow to a T, all dressed in black, carrying a single red rose and lapping up the sympathy pool from family, friends, and people who knew them through their businesses. Catherine even installed a huge headstone at Tom's gravesite and writings of poetry inscribed, showing her love for Tom. She even took out an advertisement in a local newspaper that spoke of her devotion to Tom. It would take until April 1997 for Catherine to be arrested, shortly after she had sold the pub for £500,000. When she was later charged with murder and solicitation to murder, she had already become one of the most widely discussed and recognizable individuals in the country. Later, Tom's family would petition the courts to freeze all assets until the conclusion of the trial, including the proceeds from the pub's sale. In 2000, the first trial collapsed when it became known that the jury's deliberations had been overheard. The second trial was delayed when Catherine was hospitalized, but resumed a few days later. Catherine pleaded not guilty, and as the prosecution had only circumstantial evidence, they heavily relied on the testimony of 3 specific witnesses. Between 1989 and 1991, Catherine had approached these 3 men, who became the key witnesses for the prosecution. The first man was William McLean, a self-admitted smuggler from County Monaghan, who was among the initial barmen employed at Jack White's pub when the Nevins acquired it. He was also Catherine's first known extramarital companion, and he claimed to have been compensated solely through her kindness. Years later, he received a phone call from Catherine, informing him that she was hospitalized following a heart attack. However, it was in fact a cosmetic surgery procedure. She offered him £20,000 and the prospect of rekindling their relationship if he agreed to kill Tom. His response was a firm refusal. The second man was John Jones, a former member of the political party Sinn Féin, who ran an advice clinic at the back of his shop in Dublin. She had offered to host meetings in the pub to gain favour with the IRA. She visited his shop one day and directly requested that he have the IRA kill Tom. Jones thought she was joking and refused. A few weeks later, she would return with the same plan, but Jones would decline again. She even showed up at his business premises, bruised and bandaged, claiming that Tom had assaulted her. In fact, she had undergone cosmetic surgery again. As it seems, our Catherine was fond of such procedures in the past. Eventually, she got the message and stopped asking. The third of these witnesses was Jerry Heaps, a former member of the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and he worked for John Jones in his shop. It was Jones who had originally introduced Jerry to Catherine. She approached him at least 10 times, asking him to help her kill Tom. Then she suggested to him that Tom could be killed during one of his weekly visits to the flats he owned, as it would be an opportune moment since he would have the pub takings with him. Every time Jerry refused, she would come up with another idea. One of these involved ambushing him after having a meal out with Catherine. He told her he couldn't do that because the bulk of the shot would pass through him and hit her. Catherine's response to this was that it would look great if Tom was to die in her arms. Jerry said no once again. Catherine also would have an affair with Guard Inspector Tom Kennedy, an affair he would deny in court. This affair began in 1991. Several staff members would say in court that Kennedy was a frequent visitor to the pub, and one staff member said she had seen him and Catherine in bed together on several occasions. Kennedy would say that Tom was his friend and he was the only reason he went to the pub, but Tom would say different to one of his staff the morning after a retirement party that was held at the pub for Kennedy, where Catherine would gift him paid flights to New York to visit his children, a very generous gift on Catherine's part. Kennedy will go on to say to the Gardaí that Catherine was the type of woman who would give you a pain in the head when she started getting on about things. He said he was aware of the rumors of him and Catherine having an affair, but that he was over 60 and that sex would not be a concern of his. Next, we have Judge Danica O'Buckler, who was introduced to Catherine by Tom Kennedy. Edward said he too had an affair with her, which he also denied, just like Kennedy. It was also stated that he had his own key to the pub and would let himself in and out at all hours of the night. Allegedly, Tom was very upset by this affair, according to staff members, and he would frequently argue with Catherine over it. Catherine would later go on to deny these affairs in court. On the day before Tom's murder, Monday the 18th of March, the bar and lounge saw steady customer traffic. The only unusual occurrence that day was a visit by a strange man wearing a long overcoat and carrying a bag. This man then went to make a phone call, and one of the staff said he was muttering into the phone. He spoke to Tom, and the staff presumed Tom knew him, given the nature of their conversation. This man was not seen leaving the pub that day, and it is possible that he did not leave, but instead hid in the pub and later, in fact, shot Tom. Also, after Tom died and Catherine was under investigation for his murder, there was no objection to oppose her taking on the license of the public house exclusively. The Judge Danica O'Buckler would be the one to grant her the license in his private chambers. Another theory was that the captain herself was the one who pulled the trigger, as she was the only one in the pub that night. Tom did not appear to act defensively immediately prior to it. He still had his glasses on his nose, and his pen was in his hand when the guards found him. He would not have been unduly surprised by her arrival in the kitchen. While there was no evidence of firearm residue found on her clothing, they only tested the clothes she was wearing on that night. But she could have changed her clothes before she tied herself up. After all, she had 2 hours before she got help. She also admitted to washing her hands before their arrival. In another scenario, Catherine would have had to be assisted by an accomplice who tied her hands and took the money, the gun, and the car to Dublin. The other theory is that Catherine helped one or more people to carry out the killing. The trial of the notorious Black Widow, as she was dubbed, captivated the nation from start to finish, and she quickly became one of the country's most high-profile killers. She assassinated Tom's character by claiming he was abusive, an alcoholic. Despite Catherine's continuously glamorous appearance and impeccable grooming, her tight-lipped expression and stubborn chin, along with her apparent determination to appear matronly rather than seductive, could not be concealed. Her appearance was part of the extensive web of lies she had constructed to shield herself. The media reported on Catherine's appearance, from her clothes, her hair and makeup, and even down to her nail polish. In court, it became such a problem that Judge Carl put a ban on the press reporting on her appearance. After a gripping 42-day trial, the jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for a record 5 days before she was found guilty in April 2000 for paying a hitman to murder her husband and for soliciting 3 men to do the same. She received life in prison. 3 years later, Catherine was back in court, trying to get her case overturned. The Court of Criminal Appeal said, however, that it was satisfied there was nothing in the new material that could come to light that could have assisted in Catherine's defense, and so it was dismissed. In 2010, she had another miscarriage of justice appeal dismissed. In 2014, she was denied in her bid to appeal her murder conviction to the Supreme Court. Tom had not made a will, and Catherine and he never had any children, so she was to inherit everything. Tom's mother had effectively frozen Tom's estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the pub. The application of probate by Catherine was still pending on the results of the trial. And when she was found guilty, she lost any claim to the estate. Tom's mother had also initiated legal proceedings to try and have her disinherited. She died a year before Catherine had been convicted of her son's murder, and her case was taken over by her son Patrick and daughter Margaret. They believed they should be allowed to rely on her conviction as part of their legal action, and the Supreme Court agreed. So basically, Catherine got absolutely nothing when she was found guilty. In September 2016, Catherine was admitted to the hospital and was later diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor. She stayed there for 3 days and was granted a reviewable temporary release, RTR, to receive treatment. On November 7, 2016, she was transferred to an acute post-care unit while undergoing medical treatment. She remained there until August 2017, when she again received an RTR for pre-release and re-socialization. She was provided with supportive accommodation and stayed there until she was re-hospitalized on November 6, 2017. In December 2017, she was moved to a hospice care facility, where she remained until her death in February 2018. She was 67 years old. Catherine protected her innocence until the end. Despite being convicted of murder by a jury, she insisted that this was not conclusive proof of her guilt. Additionally, she never revealed who had assisted her in killing Tom. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Georgia Williams. Shropshire, England witnessed a tragic tale of a vibrant young woman, Georgia Williams, whose promising life was cruelly cut short, leaving a profound impact on the community. Georgia Williams was born on September 17, 1995, in Telford, Shropshire, England. Growing up in a tight-knit family with her parents, Lynette and Steve Williams, alongside her older sister Scarlett, Georgia's upbringing was filled with love and support from a young age. Georgia exhibited a compassionate nature, always eager to lend a helping hand and ensure the happiness of those around her. However, this admirable quality would eventually become a vulnerability. Despite facing bullying during her middle school years, Georgia's transition to high school marked a significant turning point. She found herself embraced by a circle of friends, becoming a popular and beloved figure within the school community. Her compassionate nature and leadership skills were evident as she ascended to the role of head girl, alongside her academic pursuits. Georgia pursued her passion for service by training as an air cadet, nurturing dreams of serving as an RAF paramedic in the future. Upon reaching 17 years old, Georgia secured a position at a local petrol station, where she quickly established rapport with her colleagues. Among them was Jamie Reynolds, a 22-year-old man who seemed withdrawn and disconnected from the group. Moved by her compassionate nature, Georgia extended a hand of friendship to Jamie, determined to help alleviate his sense of isolation through her efforts. Jamie gradually integrated into the social circle of their workplace, participating in group activities and forging connections with his colleagues. As time passed, Jamie found himself developing affection for Georgia, recognizing her as the only person who had shown him kindness and believed in his potential. Filled with hope, he began to consider the possibility that Georgia might reciprocate his feelings. Encouraged by this belief, Jamie gathered the courage to express his sentiments to Georgia, conveying his desire to pursue a romantic relationship with her, even envisioning the prospect of becoming her boyfriend. However, Georgia, aware of Jamie's emotions, politely declined his romantic advances. She conveyed her reluctance to engage in a romantic relationship and emphasized her commitment to preserving their friendship. Despite his disappointment over Georgia's lack of romantic interest, Jamie appeared to accept her decision and made efforts to maintain their friendship. Yet, beneath the surface, a concerning obsession and ominous fantasy began to take hold within him. During a shift together at the petrol station, Jamie confided in Georgia about his dissatisfaction with his current situation, expressing a desire to leave his job at the petrol station and pursue his passion. Jamie hinted that he was interested in forging a career aligned with his interests, and he was eager for Georgia's support. Eager to assist, Georgia engaged him in a conversation to explore his hobbies and passions, and she learned about Jamie's interest in photography. Georgia seized the opportunity to encourage him to pursue it as a potential career path. Enthusiastic about the idea, Jamie requested Georgia's assistance in creating a professional portfolio and proposed that she be his first model. Honoring her commitment to their friendship, Georgia agreed to assist, and together they scheduled a photo shoot for Sunday, May 26, 2013. The arrangement involved Georgia and a few mutual friends gathering at Jamie's parental home for the photo shoot. As Sunday approached, Georgia found herself torn between conflicting commitments, with her family hosting a barbecue and her long-unseen grandparents attending. Georgia contemplated canceling the photo shoot at the last minute. However, mindful of Jamie's reliance on her and unwilling to disappoint him, Georgia ultimately resolved to honor her commitment. Assuring her family that she would only be a brief 5-minute drive away from Jamie's residence, Georgia planned to swiftly capture a few photographs before rejoining her family. In doing so, she aimed to fulfill her obligations to both her friend and her family, ensuring that neither party would be let down. On that specific day, Georgia quickly got ready, styling her hair and applying makeup before putting on jeans and a leather jacket as she left home at 7:30 p.m. Her father complimented her, remarking on her beauty and comparing her appearance to Sandy from the movie Grease. With her family expecting her to return promptly, Georgia set out on her journey. However, as the hours passed without her arrival, concern began to grow among her loved ones. Initially, her mother dismissed the delay, assuming Georgia had become absorbed in the photo shoot or socializing with friends. Sending a text to inquire about the conclusion of the photo shoot, her mother received a response from Georgia, indicating that the photo shoot had ended some time ago and that she was spending time with friends, implying she might return home late. Unperturbed by the exchange, Georgia's mother interpreted the text as routine, observing the customary trio of kissy face emojis that often punctuated her daughter's messages. Given Georgia's responsible character, her mother harbored no suspicions of any trouble. As the night passed, Georgia's parents went to bed, expecting her to return home by morning. However, when they woke up the next day, their concern grew as Georgia was still absent. At 6:30 a.m., her mother texted her, asking for an explanation for her prolonged absence. It wasn't until 7:30 a.m. that a response came, stating that Georgia had stayed at a friend's house and her phone's battery was running low. She assured her mother that if she didn't respond further, it was because her phone was about to shut down. Unbeknownst to Georgia's mother, these messages were not written by her daughter, raising concerns as the situation became increasingly ominous. On May 27th, Georgia's parents expected her to return home after a music festival. However, when she did not arrive, they assumed she had gone directly to the festival from her friend's house. Nevertheless, they expected her back the next morning, as she had been eagerly anticipating her first driving lesson scheduled for that day. As the night wore on without Georgia's return, her parents grew increasingly anxious, waiting up late into the night. With no sign of her, panic set in, and they reached out to relatives and friends, hoping for any information about her whereabouts. Yet, despite their efforts, no one had seen or heard from Georgia in days, deepening their concern and uncertainty. When Georgia failed to arrive and drive home the following morning for her eagerly anticipated driving lesson, her family took immediate action, reporting her disappearance to the police. Desperate for answers, they provided authorities with all the information they could gather. However, their knowledge was limited to Georgia's attendance at a photo shoot at Jamie Reynolds' residence, with no further details about her whereabouts or companions after that point. In response, the police launched an investigation, focusing their attention on Jamie Reynolds. What they uncovered about him was deeply unsettling, revealing disturbing details that raised further concerns about Georgia's safety. In 2008, Jamie had been involved in an incident where he attempted to strangle a teenage girl. Despite the seriousness of the situation, law enforcement opted for a cautionary approach, issuing Jamie a warning and allowing him to avoid facing charges. However, when authorities stumbled upon this troubling episode in Jamie's past, their suspicions intensified, with Jamie emerging as the prime suspect in Georgia Williams' disappearance. Police wasted no time in paying him a visit, arriving at his residence. Encountering silence upon knocking on the door, they resorted to forced entry, combing through the premises but finding no trace of Jamie. Thus, a frenzied manhunt ensued as authorities intensified their efforts to track down the elusive suspect. After thorough inquiries at the petrol station, it became evident that none of their co-workers had encountered Jamie or Georgia. Their absence from their shifts raised significant alarms, as they had deviated from their usual routine. Although Jamie's parents were unreachable due to their vacation, they provided authorities with crucial information regarding the registration of Jamie's van. Had with this vital lead, police across Shropshire promptly disseminated alerts to law enforcement agencies nationwide, urging them to be on high alert for Jamie's van. Before long, the authorities tracked down Jamie in Glasgow, Scotland, a staggering 200 miles from his home. His sudden departure from the country sent shockwaves, which served as a glaring indicator of suspicious behavior. On May 30th, the Glasgow police apprehended Jamie Reynolds at a modest hotel. Acting on suspicions of kidnapping, they took him into custody without delay, and he faced immediate interrogation regarding Georgia's whereabouts. However, Jamie maintained ignorance of her location, offering no helpful insights to the investigators. Subsequently, he was escorted back to Shropshire for further questioning, as Georgia's loved ones anxiously awaited updates. They received disheartening news regarding the investigation's progress. The grim outlook devastated the family, amplifying their anguish, with Jamie now detained as the primary suspect. Law enforcement seized the opportunity to search his residence thoroughly for any pertinent evidence. During the search, authorities stumbled upon a camera containing an SD card. However, their hopes of uncovering vital clues were dashed when they discovered that all files had been systematically deleted, leaving investigators to grapple with another frustrating setback. The camera underwent forensic examination at the police station, where experts diligently worked to retrieve the deleted files. Upon successful recovery, the retrieved data delivered a chilling conclusion to the investigation. Among the recovered files were several images captured on the day of the photo shoot, offering a haunting glimpse into Georgia's final moments. The initial photographs depicted Georgia in seemingly ordinary poses at the outset of the photo shoot, confirming her presence at Jamie's residence that fateful day. Despite her outward appearance of contentment and compliance, it was evident that Georgia remained unaware of the sinister intentions lurking beneath Jamie's facade. Tragically, she unwittingly walked into a perilous situation, unaware of the impending danger that ultimately befell her. As the authorities sifted through the images, the tone grew increasingly grim and unsettling. Subsequent photographs revealed a harrowing sequence of events, portraying a distraught Georgia stripped of her clothes, standing atop a red recycling bin, her hands seemingly bound behind her with a hanging rope ominously overhead. Tragically, the footage captured Jamie Reynolds' heinous act as he callously filmed Georgia's final moments, depicting her futile struggle for breath. Shockingly, he proceeded to engage in despicable acts of necrophilia, violating her lifeless body in various rooms of the house, including his parents' bed, to compound the horror. Jamie documented his depravity with hundreds of additional photographs, showcasing Georgia in degrading positions. He callously stripped her of her jewelry, preserving them as grotesque trophies of his heinous crime. The police relentlessly scoured Jamie's residence, unearthing a staggering collection of 16,800 graphic photographs and 72 distressing videos. These explicit materials depicted unimaginable acts of violence, including sexual assault and snuff films showcasing torture and murder. Shockingly, it became apparent that Jamie himself was actively engaged in the creation of his snuff film, a chilling revelation. In an admission, he confessed to deriving pleasure from acts of strangulation. Alarmed by their son's dark fascination, Jamie's parents abruptly cut short their vacation to meet with the authorities. During their conversation, they disclosed that Jamie had been exposed to this disturbing brand of ultra-violent pornography since he was just 14 years old. It is possible that his exposure to such content could have occurred even earlier. Though their intervention came about when they discovered his activities, they were unable to confiscate his laptop since he required it for school. They reached out to the internet provider and arranged for access to certain websites to be blocked. Nevertheless, at the age of 14, he independently contacted the internet provider and secured his own private Wi-Fi by making the payment, ensuring that his parents remained unaware of his continued access to these websites. When his parents initially discovered him viewing these videos, they grew alarmed and informed the police and Child Protective Services. However, they were informed that no action could be taken, as viewing such content was not deemed illegal. During the investigation, law enforcement discovered a collection of notepads containing 40 distinct narratives penned by Jamie. These stories revolved around the themes of inflicting harm, sexual assault, and the killing of women. Additionally, it was uncovered that Jamie had scoured social media platforms, printing and marking images of young girls with nooses around their necks. Among the narratives was one titled, "Georgia Williams in Surprise," mirroring the tragic events that befell Georgia. Authorities suspect that this particular narrative may have been a premeditated plan conceived from the outset to be actualized. Jamie initiated the writing process in January, completing it a mere 3 weeks before the murder occurred. Jamie stubbornly withheld any information regarding the whereabouts of Georgia's body, vehemently maintaining his innocence. Faced with his refusal to cooperate, investigators embarked on a painstaking journey to retrace Jamie's movements from the Monday morning following Georgia's murder. Their investigative trail commenced at the petrol station where surveillance footage captured Jamie refueling his vehicle, unaware that Georgia's lifeless body lay concealed in the back of his van. Following the fuel stop, Jamie embarked on a journey spanning 60 miles, eventually arriving at a movie theater. Remarkably, he callously abandoned Georgia's remains in the van parked within the theater's lot, before proceeding inside to indulge in a film screening. In a disturbing turn of events, Jamie's actions at the movie theater represented his twisted attempt to fulfill his desire to take Georgia out on a date, albeit in a macabre and horrifying manner. However, law enforcement lost track of Jamie following his departure from the theater, prompting authorities to issue a public appeal for information regarding his whereabouts. Fortunately, this appeal yielded results, with individuals coming forward to report sightings of Jamie's van in the vicinity of the New York-Georgia mountain pass near Exum. This area, abundant with dense woodland and treacherously muddy terrain, served as the backdrop for Jamie's attempt to evade capture. Recollections of Jamie and his van were vivid among locals, particularly due to an incident where his vehicle became mired in mud. Good Samaritans had intervened to help extricate it from the muck. Acting on this crucial tip, law enforcement ventured into the wooded area where Jamie had been spotted. Tragically, it was in this secluded setting that they made the grim discovery of Georgia's unclothed body. Following the recovery, Georgia's remains were transported back to Shropshire. A subsequent post-mortem examination revealed that Georgia had succumbed to asphyxiation, likely resulting from pressure applied to her neck by a ligature. Additionally, forensic analysis uncovered bruising on her back, indicative of Jamie having forcefully pressed her downward using his knee, exacerbating her helplessness and suffering. Despite steadfastly maintaining his innocence and denying any involvement in her murder, Jamie's stance took a dramatic shift on the inaugural day of the trial in December 2013. Without warning, he opted to rise and plead guilty to all charges leveled against him. In a poignant moment, Georgia's father addressed the court, articulating the enduring anguish he and his wife bore from the haunting image of their daughter's lifeless body, lying in the solemn confines of the hospital's chapel of rest, an indelible scar etched upon their souls for eternity. Throughout the trial, revelations surfaced regarding Jamie's prior brushes with the law. In 2008, he had attracted police attention, receiving what the judge deemed a final warning, following an unsettling incident involving the confinement of another one-year-old girl in his residence, a harrowing precursor to the tragedy that befell Georgia in 2011. He found himself under scrutiny once more, after an incident where he recklessly reversed his car into that of a girl who rebuffed his romantic advances. Although the case was eventually closed, the judge, Mr. Justice Wilkie, did not mince words, labeling Jamie a sexual deviant and expressing grave concerns about his potential to escalate and become a dangerous serial offender. Consequently, Jamie was handed a whole life term, a sentence reserved for the most heinous of crimes, ensuring he would spend the rest of his days behind bars without the possibility of parole. This marked Jamie as the 46th individual to receive such a sentence, setting a grim record as the youngest in history to be condemned to a whole life term. Justice Will's remarks during sentencing painted a chilling portrait of the events, underscoring the profound anguish inflicted upon Georgia. He emphasized the torturous nature of her ordeal, highlighting Jamie's twisted fixation with violent and sadistic pornography, culminating in a grotesque display of power over his victim as she faced a harrowing demise. Jamie Reynolds bowed his head in shame as Georgia's grief-stricken parents and sister listened to the harrowing details of her tragic demise and the horrors she endured at his hands. The courtroom was filled with unbearable tension as the jury was confronted with the gruesome images depicting Georgia's final moments, prompting her devastated family to flee in anguish. In 2014, Reynolds sought to appeal his whole life sentence, but was met with defeat. The following year, a serious case review castigated police officers, children's services personnel, and mental health professionals for their handling of Reynolds before the murder. The review highlighted systemic failures in interagency collaboration when Reynolds had previously come to law enforcement's attention 5 years earlier, following an incident where he attempted to strangle another girl at his residence. Georgia's parents expressed profound sorrow upon reading the report, lamenting the missed opportunities to intervene and prevent their daughter's tragic fate, stating, "Having lost Georgia to pure evil, we cried when we read this report and the failings of all agencies involved, because it was so obvious that Reynolds was, if not one already, a murderer in the making. George's death could have been prevented. Outside the courtroom, Mr. Williams expressed the family's profound grief, stating, "There is no sentence that we can ever say we're satisfied with, because it'll never bring Georgia back. She's dead, she's gone physically, and lives in our hearts." He emphasized the irreparable loss they experienced and lamented that regardless of the length of Reynolds' prison term, he still retained the one precious gift he had denied their daughter: life. Jamie Reynolds continues to serve his sentence in prison to this day. Georgia's mother, Lynette, has since penned their journey of grief in her book, Our Georgia, which delves into the family's profound sense of betrayal stemming from the failures that allowed Reynolds, with his disturbing fixation on snuff movies, to roam free and ultimately commit murder. Described as a powerful and moving memoir, the book serves as both a tribute to Georgia's memory and a poignant exploration of the aftermath of her tragic death. Georgia's tragic passing inflicted irreparable wounds upon those who cherished her, leaving behind an unfathomable void. Her absence stands as a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of life and the importance of treasuring each precious moment with our loved ones. In the wake of her loss, the community united in solidarity, offering unwavering support to Georgia's grieving family and friends, providing a source of solace during their darkest days. Amy Widener faced a significant life change when she became a mother at only giving birth to a daughter. This development was notably challenging for her mother, Gloria Widener. Despite the difficulties, Gloria steadfastly supported her daughter. Little did Gloria know that the complexity of handling her daughter's early pregnancy would soon be eclipsed by an even more distressing event, affecting their family just 2 years later. Born in 1973, Amy Widener was part of a large family that included her older brother, John Paul, who was 1 year older than Amy, and 2 younger sisters, Nee and Cassie, who were 1 and 4 years younger respectively. Their mother, Gloria Widener, single-handedly raised the children following a long-ago divorce from their father, who played no role in their upbringing. The family of 5 resided in Indianapolis, where Amy was her mother's primary aide, handling cooking, cleaning, and caring for her sisters. Amy harbored dreams of becoming a teacher. She was known for her bright and cheerful demeanor as well as an engaging smile. However, at age 14, Amy's life took an unexpected turn when she became pregnant. Initially hesitant to share the news with her mother, she concealed her growing belly under loose clothing for over 5 months. Eventually, the pregnancy became difficult to hide any longer. After nearly 6 months, Amy found the courage to approach her mother. Breaking down in tears, she revealed her situation. "Mom, I don't want you to hate me," she tearfully confided. Although taken aback by the news, Gloria embraced her daughter with comforting words of support despite feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about what lay ahead. "I was stunned. I just couldn't believe it," Gloria recounted later. "I thought it was the worst thing that could happen in my life," she added, unaware of even more heart-wrenching events that were yet to unfold. Amy Widener's baby was fathered by Tony Abba, 20, who was a friend of her elder brother. Their relationship had been a well-kept secret. None of their family members were aware of their intimacy until Amy's pregnancy came to light. Gloria, Amy's mother, swiftly intervened. She prohibited any further contact between Amy and Tony. She insisted that Amy cut ties completely with the father of her unborn child, laying down strict conditions for her daughter's future interactions. On October 25, 1987, Amy Widener embraced motherhood by welcoming her daughter Emily into the world. Remarkably, just 6 days after giving birth, Amy resumed her education. Now she juggled the responsibilities of being a new mother. Gloria Widener, recognizing the importance of education for her daughter's future, provided unwavering support to Amy. She often cared for Emily to facilitate Amy's schooling. Gloria also acknowledged Amy's need for a typical teenage life and allowed her time with friends. Amy's dedication to her studies never waned, even amidst the demands of motherhood. she continued to excel academically, earning praise from her teachers for her diligence and hard work. The Widner family adapted to the new addition by sharing the responsibilities of caring for Emily. Life seemed to be realigning on a positive path as years passed. Amy successfully navigated her challenges. However, just as they found their footing, a sudden turn of events altered everything. On November 13, 1989, 16-year-old Amy awoke with a severe sore throat and decided to stay home from school with her 2-year-old daughter Emily. When Gloria offered to take Emily to the nanny's house, Amy opted to keep her daughter with her. After the family shared breakfast, they dispersed for the day. Gloria headed to work, and Amy's siblings went off to school, leaving Amy and Emily at home alone. Concerned after no answer from multiple calls made at 9:30 a.m., and again hours later, Gloria asked a neighbor to check in on them. The neighbor's report of an unresponsive and unusually quiet house worried Gloria. So she left work and rushed home. Upon arrival, she found Emily sitting on the stairs. Receiving no answer to her calls Amy prompted her venture upstairs. The scene in Amy's bedroom was tragic and shocking, a moment etched forever in memory. Amy lay lifeless and unclad on her bed, surrounded by a significant amount of blood. In a state of emergency, Gloria immediately dialed 911. Upon arrival, the police commenced a meticulous examination of the Widener residence. The scene initially suggested an attempted burglary, as stereo equipment and a graphic equalizer belonging to Amy's older brother John were missing. Also gone from Amy's room was a simple glass jar piggy bank containing around $50 saved for school. There were no signs of forced entry. The perpetrator might have entered through an unlocked back door, or possibly the front door, opened by Amy herself. Crucial evidence was found in Amy's room. There was bloody palm print on the bed linen and wall, along with several strands of body and head hair, presumably from the assailant. The medical examiner concluded that Amy Widener sustained a blow to the head with a sharp object. She was sexually assaulted and ultimately strangled. It's deeply unsettling that Emily, Amy's 2-year-old daughter, could have witnessed these harrowing events. Fortuitously, she was found unharmed. Recognizing any information Emily might provide as potentially valuable, police made efforts to communicate with her despite her young age of just over 2 years. They used finger puppets to create a more child-friendly environment and gently probed for details she could recall. During this interaction, Emily, energetically moving around, mentioned only that her mother seemed very angry that day. As part of the evidence collection process, police sectioned off and removed the portion of the wall bearing the assailant's bloody palm print. They also gathered the victim's clothing and bed linens from the crime scene to aid their investigation into this tragic case. In their pursuit for answers regarding Amy Widener's case, detectives initiated inquiries among her family, friends, and nearby residents. John Paul, Amy's 17-year-old brother, mentioned how the investigators initially suspected him during the interrogation. However, he had a reliable alibi, and no evidence linked him to the incident. Tony Abia, Amy's former boyfriend and Emily's father, was also interrogated. He expressed deep affection for Amy and denied any harmful intentions towards her. Tony had a solid alibi for the day of the crime. The police's attention was also drawn to Troy Jackson, who lived next to the Wideners. He knew about the stereo system stolen on the day of the murder. Despite his denial of involvement and the absence of any bruises or scratches on his hands, Troy provided hair samples that did not match those found at the crime scene. After passing a polygraph test, suspicions against him were dropped. Besides these three, the police interviewed other acquaintances, neighbors, and classmates of Amy. Fingerprints and hair samples were taken from all of them, but none fell under suspicion. Amy Widener's funeral was held shortly afterward, drawing a considerable crowd who wished to pay their respects. Her death was deeply felt within the community. Detectives attended the funeral too, carefully observing the attendees as part of their ongoing investigation. A particularly poignant memory was a cherished photograph of Amy where she wore her favorite white turtleneck vest with a floral design. It was in this beloved attire that Amy, a young girl whose life was tragically cut short, was laid to rest. In the aftermath of their tragic loss, the Widner family clung to hope that Amy's killer would be swiftly apprehended and brought to justice. Yet as days turned into weeks and then months, no suspects were identified. Following Amy's passing, Gloria Widner legally adopted her granddaughter Emily, stepping into the role of motherhood once again. The weight of grief and fear burdened Gloria. She was haunted by thoughts of the perpetrator and worried about her family's safety. She never left her daughters unattended at home and lived in a state of constant anxiety with the assailant still at large. Gloria even considered relocating to a new home for safety reasons. Financial constraints limited their options, leaving them to navigate these challenging times in their current residence. Amy's friends were also deeply affected by the tragedy, consumed by fear that the criminal might target them next. They requested their parents to fortify their homes, even boarding up windows with planks, a precautionary measure against a similar fate. One day, Gloria returned home expecting to find her younger daughters back from school. Upon entering, she was met with an unsettling silence. The house felt unusually empty. She noticed that the girls' outdoor shoes were in their usual spot. A surge of dreadful thoughts raced through her mind, apprehending another calamity with each step towards the upstairs. The distance felt increasingly vast. Standing at the threshold of their bedroom, Gloria steeled herself for what she might find. Upon entering, she discovered, much to her relief, that her daughters had merely fallen asleep. As time went on, Emily, Amy's daughter, matured. She was spared the memories of the tragic events surrounding her biological mother. Emily had no recollection of the police interrogation or being informed of her mother's demise. The detectives periodically revisited the Wagner family, inadvertently causing them to revisit the pain of that dreadful day. Gloria revealed that there came a time when this continual revisiting became too much to bear. She yearned for one thing: for the authorities to allow her family some peace and to cease reawakening memories that could not bring Amy back. 13 years after Amy Wagner's murder in 2002, an unexpected development arose in the case. The Indianapolis Police Department received a call from a 29-year-old man claiming to have had a dream where Amy communicated with him about her demise. Although he provided details about the murder, most of this information had already been disclosed in news reports. The police investigated this individual, who was 16 at the time of the incident, and resided across the street from Amy's home. His fingerprints and DNA were examined to determine any potential involvement, but no matches were found, leading to his release. While his call didn't contribute significant evidence, it prompted detectives to re-examine the cold case in 2002. The investigation re-engaged with some of Amy's friends and acquaintances, particularly those who had encountered legal issues over the intervening years. Despite renewed efforts, the investigation once again reached an impasse, leaving the case unsolved. In 2011, a Facebook group titled "Remembering Amy Ware" was established by Amy's friends, reigniting interest in her unsolved case. The detective responsible for the cold case, unfamiliar with Facebook, enlisted the help of his colleague, Detective Bill Carter, to print out information from the group. This task piqued Carter's interest in Amy Ware's case. Although his expertise was in non-homicide-related illegal activities, Carter felt compelled to explore the case files of Amy's murder during his free time. Carter delved deep into the 2-decade-old case. He scrutinized every detail in the file, re-examining evidence and reviewing school attendance records from the day of the murder. He also scrutinized the funeral attendance list. He inputted the case details into a database and identified overlooked leads, including several friends of Amy's brother who had never been interviewed by the police, nor had their DNA been collected. In his pursuit of new leads, Detective Carter reached out to the Ware family and Amy's friends in 2011, seeking names of individuals who might possess information about the case. He initiated DNA collection from persons previously overlooked in the initial 1989 investigation following the crime. The police had canvassed the neighborhood where the Wares lived, and documented residents' names. Amy had long-standing friends, and while she reiterated most of the previously known and investigated, she also mentioned an unfamiliar name to Detective Carter, Rodney Dink. In 2012, Detective Carter received authorization from the Cold Case Unit to formally take on Amy Wagner's case. His first step was to locate Rodney Dink to ascertain whether he could be a potential suspect. The Wagner family was quite familiar with Rodney, as he was a friend of Amy's older brother, John Paul. They spent time together engaging in activities like biking and fishing. When Carter inquired about Rodney with John Paul, he described him as a reserved individual who largely kept to himself and had never aroused suspicion. Carter visited the home of 40-year-old Rodney Dink, who resided with his mother near the Wagners. Rodney was employed at an auto parts store, had been divorced for some time, and had a grown son with whom he had minimal contact. Upon Carter's arrival at Rodney's residence, his mother greeted him and informed the detective that Rodney was at work. Carter left his business card requesting Rodney contact him upon his return. That evening, Rodney called Carter, who promptly requested a meeting to discuss Amy Wagner's murder case. Rodney consented to the meeting and allowed Carter to visit at his house. However, when Carter returned for the meeting, Rodney was nowhere to be found. Carter examined Rodney's criminal background and found that he had previous charges for assault in 1991 and theft in 1997. With Rodney's fingerprints already in the database, they were compared with the palm print found at the Wagner residence. This test aimed to either connect or exonerate Rodney from the crime. When the results came back, they confirmed a match between Rodney's prints and the bloody palm print at the crime scene. After 23 years, a suspect was finally identified. However, Rodney had vanished from his home, prompting an intensive search by the police. The breakthrough came when Rodney's credit card activity revealed a rented car with an OnStar tracking system. The detectives located the car in Indianapolis where Rodney was hiding. Rodney, while at a friend's house, was confronted by the police. Brandishing a knife and declaring his innocence, he ultimately injured himself during the encounter. He attempted to attack the officers but was subdued with a taser, handcuffed, and then taken to the hospital. During a 2-day hospital interrogation that was recorded on camera, Rodney confessed to Amy's murder. He initially claimed his intent had been burglary and had not anticipated Amy's presence due to her illness. Rodney recounted entering through a sliding glass door and being startled by Amy. In a panic, he hastily grabbed the nearest object and struck her on the head, which led to her death. As he recounted the incident over 2 days, Rodney frequently mentioned his vague recollection of the events of that day. He attributed this fogginess to the 23 years that had elapsed since the crime occurred. His account of his actions lacked precision. At one point, he even suggested he had visited the house with an acquaintance he referred to as Bag. However, Rodney struggled to recall clear details about this supposed accomplice and could not provide a description of their appearance. According to Rodney, Bag had initially kept watch outside before joining him inside, where they both confronted Amy. When questioned about Emily's presence during the incident, Rodney claimed he did not see her, nor was aware of her cries in the house, oblivious to the fact that she had been nearby throughout the ordeal. Throughout the interrogation, Rodney remained composed and polite, not exhibiting behavior typically associated with a murderer, possibly due to the passage of time since committing the crime. His DNA sample was taken, and as anticipated, it matched that found in 1989 on Amy Wagner's bedsheet and blanket. The disclosure of Rodney's guilt came as a profound shock to the Wagner family. They struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, unassuming Rodney with his heinous act. Rodney wasn't just Amy's older brother, John Paul's friend and classmate. He also lived across the street and frequently visited their home. Remarkably, Rodney had even attended Amy's funeral, mourning with others and extending condolences to Gloria Wagner. Later, Detective Carter discovered Rodney's signature in the guest book at Amy's funeral. Upon revisiting the case, he found that Rodney's name was first mentioned in 2003 by Tony Abercrombie, Amy's former boyfriend and Emily's biological father, who pointed out Rodney's regular visits to the Wadner family. Carter deduced that back in 1989, for some unknown reason, Rodney Den had evaded suspicion entirely. He wasn't considered a suspect or even questioned at that time. In 2012, while investigating Rodney Dan's background further, detectives unearthed another grim detail. Rodney's biological son, Dylan Dank, was imprisoned for a crime committed in 2009. At just 16 years old, Dylan had fatally assaulted his birth mother, Mary McHenry. He claimed he acted out due to her abuse and insults, ultimately using a baseball bat to inflict fatal injuries. Tragically, Mary succumbed to her wounds. Dylan turned 17 just days after the incident. This eerie parallel, father and son committing significant crimes at almost similar ages, struck detectives as both chilling and peculiar. Despite having minimal involvement in Dylan's upbringing due to divorcing Mary McHenry early on, Rodney appeared at Dylan's trial in 2009 and agreed to a plea deal, resulting in a 20-year prison sentence. Dylan's anticipated release will be in 2029 when he turns 37 years old. In the ongoing investigation of Amy Widener's case, Rodney Dink initially maintained that he had an accomplice during the crime, a young man. In June 2013, merely 10 days before his trial was scheduled to commence, year-old Rodney recanted his previous statement. He admitted to acting alone in the murder of Amy, asserting that no one else was involved. As a result of this confession and the evidence against him, Rodney received a sentence of 65 years in prison. Following the resolution of Amy's case, the Wader family arranged a gathering with Detective Bill Carter. They commemorated the 24 years without Amy by releasing 24 balloons into the sky. The family expressed their gratitude for Detective Carter's pivotal role in the case. It was Carter who pinpointed Rodney Den as the perpetrator within just 12 days of delving into the case and brought the investigation to a close. In recognition of his outstanding work, Detective Bill Carter was honored with an award by the Indianapolis Police Department in January 2014. Despite an offer to join the Homicide Investigation Department, he chose to remain in his current role. Emily Ware, Amy's daughter, matured into adulthood. She graduated from the same high school her biological mother had attended before pursuing higher education at a university. Seeking broader opportunities, she relocated from Indianapolis to California. Gloria Ware, Amy's mother, openly shared her enduring grief and daily remembrance of her daughter. She continues to reside in the house where the tragedy unfolded. Amy's room, still adorned with her photographs, now welcomes Gloria's grandchildren during their holiday visits. This brings a new sense of joy and life to a space once marked by loss. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Karina Vetrano. The story of Karina Vetrano is both horrifying and baffling. Firstly, nothing seemed amiss on the day of the fateful event. The attack occurred in broad daylight in a fairly populated area. Secondly, her death has critical aspects to it. Thirdly, the investigation and sentencing of the perpetrator raised many questions. On Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, Karina arranged to meet her father after work to spend time together. Since Miss Vetrano had moved away, family gatherings had become rare because everyone was busy with their own matters. In addition to her commitments, she was balancing two jobs. Philip picked up his daughter and took her home. There, the family shared their impressions of the past week. When Karina was about to leave, she asked if her father wanted to go jogging with her, as they often did, covering several miles together. Her father replied that he couldn't this time due to severe back pain that nothing seemed to alleviate. Perhaps he needed a new prescription, or maybe it was just the change in weather. Mr. Vetrano offered to call a cab for Karina due to his discomfort and inability to join her run. However, the weather was beautiful, the heat had abated, and there was a fresh scent in the air, hence Karina declined his offer. She was training for the upcoming marathon. The young woman had recently broken up with her boyfriend and wanted to distract herself. A jog would clearly do her good. That evening was the last time her parents saw their youngest daughter. At 5:45 p.m., she left the house for a jog. Her first stop was Spring Creek Park, a cozy and tranquil place buried in greenery, a true paradise amongst the city's infrastructure. However, only part of the park was available for walking. The rest was covered with thickets and swamps. Mr. Vetrano asked his daughter to stick to her usual route and stay away from unfamiliar paths and people. Unfortunately, Karina ignored his advice in search of solitude. She decided to go to a grassy, deserted place. Karina's thoughts were abruptly interrupted. She felt a sharp pain in the back of her head and fell down. This rash decision cost the young woman her life. A frightening uncertainty entered the Vetrano home. It had been 2 hours since they had said goodbye to their youngest daughter. She should have been home by now, or at least answering the calls of her parents, who were frantically trying to reach her, and she had promised to keep her cell phone with herself. The anxiety was growing. Her father sensed that something was wrong and decided to seek help from his neighbor, the chief of the New York City Police Department. They were on good terms, and the high-ranking official knew that Philip would not make a fuss over nothing. After that, Karina Vetrano was reported missing. Police began searching for the young woman, combing the park area and surrounding streets. As a result, experienced canine units were brought in, since it is known the first 24 hours after the disappearance. The disappearance of a person are crucial. Law enforcement utilized all available resources before nightfall. At the same time, Mr. Vetrano, along with a group of volunteers, searched for his daughter on his own. He scoured the park from end to end, combing paths and wading through tall grass, all while making phone calls. As dusk fell, he noticed a light in the grass. As he approached, he recognized Karina's phone. Maybe she lost it and just didn't let them know? Philip approached, headed toward police officers, deciding to continue picking his way through the thicket, stepping into the grass. As he ventured further, Philip stumbled upon something soft, a partially undressed female body lying face down. When he turned it over, a familiar face stared back at him. A desperate scream escaped from his father's chest. It was Karina. She hadn't simply lost her phone as he had initially believed. His little girl didn't answering her phone because life had been cruelly taken from her. The crushing realization of what had transpired overwhelmed Mr. Vetrano. The police, hearing the screaming and yelling, quickly rushed to him. They dragged Philip away from his daughter's body, explaining that it was now a crime scene. They emphasized that anything in the vicinity could be considered evidence and implored him not to touch anything to prevent tampering. On the journey home, Mr. Vetrano was lost in thought, tormented by how to break the news of their daughter's death to his wife. Images of past memories flooded his mind. He recalled vividly how on July 12, 1986, in Queens, their second daughter was born. From an early age, Philip had been proud of Karina. She was obedient and well-mannered. He remembered taking her to school for the first time and how excellently she performed academically. Her strong educational foundation enabled her to earn advanced degrees. Karina graduated from St. John's University with a master's in speech pathology. She always dreamed of aiding children and worked tirelessly with autistic kids. Karina loved traveling and writing and had a passion for sports, especially running, an interest she shared with Philip, which brought them closer together. He recalled how closely he scrutinized her suitors out of paternal jealousy, eager for her to find true love and eventually establish a strong family like his own with Kathy. He hoped for wonderful grandchildren. The return journey felt endless. As they approached the house, Mr. Vetrano paused at the entrance and took a deep breath. Fortunately, he didn't need to explain anything to her. She understood everything from her husband's face. Kathy cried, approached her husband, and hugged him. Soon, Karina's relatives and friends learned of the incident. They struggled to recover from the shock. Believing in the sudden death of the young woman was hard, let alone its violent nature. Miss Vetrano had been subjected to a brutal attack. This was the conclusion reached by investigators. At first glance, it was obvious that the woman had resisted. Even in death, her fists remained clenched. Bruises and abrasions were found on her once young and healthy body, and her athletic clothing was torn. The autopsy showed that the back of the victim's skull had been damaged by a blunt object, probably a stone. However, the cause of death was asphyxiation. A clear mark was visible on the woman's neck. The forensic examination also revealed the intimate nature of the crime violence. The experts' findings confirmed the police's initial suspicions. Earth and grass were found under the victim's fingernails, probably in an attempt to free herself from her attacker's grip and escape. Specialists examined her mouth and found teeth knocked out and cracked in places. She had clearly bitten to defend herself. Even the woman's neck was covered with numerous scratches. She was grabbing with her hands, trying to force her attacker to let go of her. Shortly after this tragedy, new information leaked to the media from Princeton, Massachusetts. Another jogger's body was found among tall grass. The woman had apparently also been out for a walk in a secluded place and suffered a similar fate. At first glance, these cases seemed identical, raising questions about another potential serial offender. In the United States, geneticists took charge of the case, tasked with comparing DNA samples collected from the crime scenes. Fortunately, unidentified samples were found on both victims. Contrary to police expectations, the analysis showed no connection between the crimes. It turned out that the DNA samples belonged to different individuals. It's well known that most lethal crimes are committed by someone close to the victim. Thus, police couldn't ignore any possibility. To this end, the victim's father provided his DNA, since he was first to discover his daughter's body. Later on, all of her relatives also underwent a DNA test which yielded no matches. Detectives then decided to interview Karina's family and friends to find out if she had any enemies or ill wishes. It turned out there were none. She was respected and loved by everyone. Investigators developed a new theory. Someone acted on base motives upon meeting Karina in a secluded place and attacked her. Feeling stuck, they sought public help by offering a $10,000 reward for information leading to the perpetrator. The initiative received widespread response. Detectives explored some 250 leads, conducted 600 genetic tests, and compiled more than 1,700 reports, all to no avail. It seemed like the perpetrator hadn't committed crimes before, or at least hadn't been caught for them, complicating things further. On August 31, 2016, a utility worker approached the police station with significant information at the time of Miss Vetrano's death. He found himself in a restricted area of the park one day. Suddenly, a man emerged from the bushes and took off running in a northerly direction. Because of his testimony, the New York Police Department created and distributed a sketch of the suspect in December 2016. However, they considered that the person shown in the sketch might have just been a passerby caught at the wrong place and time. Unfortunately, releasing this sketch didn't provide any new leads, and the investigation fell into another long stalemate. On December 4, 2016, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined in to help solve Karina Vetrano's case. At first, they developed a psychological profile of the perpetrator. According to FBI experts, this individual was very familiar with the area, especially the park where everything occurred, suggesting he might live or continue to live nearby. Fearing capture now, he seems to avoid that area. It was evident he knew that the quiet and partially overgrown territory was perfect for hiding his actions. Based on this idea, police conducted screenings among local African American men. However, this didn't bring about any breakthroughs. Let's go to take a look about Chanel Lewis. Chanel Lewis's life didn't stand out much from other young African American individuals. He lived in one of Brooklyn's low-income housing complexes, approximately 4 or 5 miles from Spring Creek Park. Chanel was unemployed and living with his mother, 3 sisters, and their children. One detail setting him apart was his diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Yet this did not stop him from graduating from a private school for students with emotional and behavioral issues. Former classmates remembered Chanel as a quiet loner who constantly faced bullying. One shared that even girls intimidated and punched him. He had no friends. Another peer noted that while Lewis sometimes fought back, he wasn't effective at it and often got ridiculed for his clothing and appearance. Chanel always wore a hoodie and would smirk and walk away when things got tough, earning him the unfortunate nickname African Lizard. 17-year-old Danielle Munes, a fellow student, described Chanel as a bright student with good grades. "He liked to show me funny videos on the bus," she recalled. "I never saw him being cruel." Some sources reported that the young man once claimed he wanted to harm all the girls during his time in middle school, even posing the question, "What happens if I bring a knife to school?" Dr. Edward Dana, the executive director of the school to which Chanel was transferred, commented on this. "We received no reports of threats in middle school. During his time at our school, he had no disciplinary sanctions. I never heard him make threatening statements towards other students." Nonetheless, Chanel was a troubled teenager who often experienced bullying. He dreamed of working in social services, aspiring to help those in distress. When conflicts arose at home, he would wander the streets frequently and visit the park. Lewis had several minor encounters with the police, 2 for violations in Spring Creek and 1 for urinating in public in May 2016. Another incident happened when a local merchant reported Lewis for loitering in his store with a crowbar. Responding officers checked Chanel's ID and released him as he had no prior incidents. However, this information was retained by the police and later played a crucial role in the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death. In February 2017, Detective John Russo, who was involved in the investigation, remembered something significant. He had repeatedly seen a young man in a hoodie wandering around the park. Russo even attempted to follow him once, intrigued by his behavior. The young man walked slowly and stopped for long periods in front of houses near the park, as if scouting them for potential burglaries. However, Russo lost sight of him when he contacted his colleagues by phone. Following a store owner's report of suspicious activity, a teenager matching Chanel's description came to the police's attention 2 months into the investigation. Detective Russo recalled this wanderer, thinking he might have seen or heard something relevant. Investigators then focused on Chanel Lewis after Detective Russo took a closer look at his file. Chanel's peculiarities had raised their interest. The police began inquiries about him, questioning acquaintances and teachers. It emerged that he had allegedly expressed a desire to harm girls. This news stirred significant concern and suspicion. With no other leads, officers decided to focus on Lewis. It was discovered that during Karina's death, Chanel was not at home. After an argument with his family, he had gone to the park. Upon his return, his appearance was disheveled, his clothes torn, and he had visible bruises and abrasions. When his mother inquired about what had happened, Lewis claimed he had been attacked. His account matched the timeline with a witness's description of a man fleeing the park. Additionally, on August 3, 2016, Lewis's father, a former school principal, took him to the hospital for treatment of severe wounds, mostly cuts, and he also had an injured hand. The investigators reviewed the medical records from that day and found the story plausible. However, they noted similarities between events involving Chanel Lewis and Karina Vetrano. On February 4, 2017, Chanel was brought to the police station and voluntarily provided his DNA for analysis. Detectives wondered if a perpetrator would willingly do this. The interrogation began on the morning of February 5th. Lewis admitted that he was indeed in the park around 5 p.m. on August 2, 2016, but clarified he was walking on dirt paths, listening to music, not through thickets. He confessed to encountering a young woman jogging with her phone in her hand. When asked by detectives if something happened when he encountered her, Chanel nodded and quietly said yes. "I was walking in the park, trying to distract myself from a family argument, when I met a woman alone," he began again. "I decided to follow her. When she passed by me, I grabbed her shoulders and threw her to the ground, then hit her face about 5 times so she couldn't scream." He recalled how his punches knocked out several of her teeth, injuring his own hand in the process, echoing details eerily consistent with earlier evidence they had gathered. He also mentioned that the struggle lasted about 5 minutes. Miss Atrano fiercely resisted by biting. To avoid drawing attention, Lewis dragged her off the path into Tall, where he tried to undress and assault her. She was horrified, but kept resisting. Chanel then strangled her until he realized she was no longer alive. When asked if he knew the victim beforehand, he replied, "I did not know her before this. It all happened by chance." The motive for the act was unexpected and bizarre. Loud music played by a neighborhood gang member for hours had triggered Chanel's hatred and uncontrollable aggression. These negative emotions were unleashed on the unfortunate woman, a strange reason indeed. Investigators' confusion faded when DNA comparison results matched perfectly. Microscopic traces found on the victim's body and phone belonged to Chanel. Consequently, the police and prosecutor concluded the case was solved and ready for court. However, the motive still seemed unlikely. It's possible Chanel had noticed Karina before, since he often went to that park. He might have seen her with her father, liked her, and decided to approach her. After being rejected, he became furious and attacked her, causing the situation to spiral out of control. This scenario would have been more understandable. On November 5, 2018, the trial against Chanel Lewis began. Despite his previous statements to authorities, Lewis pleaded not guilty, a stance echoed by his family denying his involvement in the crime. The prosecution charged Lewis with ending a life and sexual assault, facing him with a sentence ranging from 25 years to life imprisonment. The debate over Lewis's guilt not only unfolded in the courtroom, but also spilled over into the media. Lewis's defense team stirred things up by pointing out alleged legal violations during his arrest, along with several news outlets. They claimed racial bias and discrimination. However, the judge dismissed these allegations as baseless, emphasizing that the investigation complied with legal standards. The prosecution presented tangible evidence and DNA analysis findings, while the defense argued that this evidence was insufficient and contaminated due to many people at the crime scene, including Karina's father, who discovered her body. Forensic biologist Linda Rosano stated that odds of the DNA belonging to someone other than Lewis were 1 in 6 trillion. The prosecutor also introduced Lewis's phone records, revealing his internet searches on second chances and forgiveness in Catholicism, which raised questions about what sin Chanel hoped to atone for. The release of Lewis's confession video sparked further controversy. His lawyers argued he was under immense pressure, leading to a coerced confession. They suspected police might have fabricated evidence. The recording commenced only after Lewis was pressured, raising concerns that the search of his home violated protocols. The defense suggested that the investigation into Karina Vetrano's death was initially mishandled. With public pressure mounting for an arrest, they argued, Lewis became a scapegoat. The jury was deeply influenced by the defense's compelling arguments. After considering both sides, jurors could not reach a conclusive verdict. On November 21, 2018, the judge declared a mistrial. A retrial was initially scheduled for January 22, 2019, but later postponed to March 2019. Following 5 hours of deliberation during the retrial, Chanel Lewis was ultimately found guilty of Karina Vetrano's death and sentenced to life without parole on July 23, 2019. The defense employed delay tactics by citing an anonymous source to allege misconduct by a juror, suggesting jury pressure and conspiracy. A case that seemed straightforward at first sparked widespread prejudices and fears in society. Karina Vetrano's tragic death affected many, serving as a stark reminder for women to remain vigilant about their safety. The case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gorcys. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorces had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala. Little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados, in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorces, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man, whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorces worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Garcés was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's two younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which he tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Garcés was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Garcés ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, He too stopped communicating with the Gorsets family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Gorsets, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now, before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast, and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night, and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorseys, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses, took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated, brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. Drew Katrina Schoten was born September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She was the younger of 2 children to her parents Alan and Linda. When Drew was 3 years old, her parents divorced but kept their friendship. From age 10, she and her brother Sven were raised by Linda and her second husband, Sid Walker, a travel agent in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, renowned as one of Minnesota's most scenic vacation spots. Drew blossomed in high school, becoming an honor student, joining the golf team, and getting elected homecoming queen in 1999. But her real passion was for art. Her room at home was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and her friends. After graduating from high school, she went to the University of North Dakota Grand Forks, a city of about 50,000 people. Friends described Drew as a person in love with life and ready to lend a helping hand to everyone. She often traveled around the country, but her dream was to visit Australia, and Drew was going to go there in the spring of 2004. In preparation for the event, to save up more money, Drew worked 2 jobs in her spare time: a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew's shift at the Victoria's Secret store, located in Columbia Mall, ended at 4 p.m. Later that day, she was supposed to work at a nightclub. Before leaving the mall, Drew decided to go shopping and bought a purse from a certain store. She called her boyfriend, Chris Lane, as she made her way to her car in the parking lot. Suddenly, after Drew said, "Okay, the call was disconnected, but Chris didn't give it much thought. There was nothing important they were discussing, and so he didn't call back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again, and it was Drew calling. When he answered it, all he heard was a noise, like the sound of the wind and the sound of buttons being pressed on the phone. 3 weeks later, in an interview on a television station, Chris recounted the thoughts that flashed through his mind when his conversation with Drew was interrupted. "I did not know the sense of urgency of this phone call at the time," he said. "I never in a million years dreamt that this was happening. There was no sense of urgency, more just a cell phone call being cut off for any number of reasons. Honestly, I had no idea that this terrible thing was happening." Drew was living in a college dorm where she shared a room with a friend named Meg Murphy. About the same time Chris received a strange phone call, Meg received a call from the nightclub where they were trying to find out why Drew hadn't come to work and wasn't answering the phone. She was a responsible employee and always came to work early, so her absence immediately caused everyone's concern. However, Meg didn't know where Drew might be and was surprised that she hadn't shown up for work. Trying to find out where her friend Meg had disappeared, she first called mutual acquaintances and then called the local hospital, where she was told that Drew had not been admitted there. Around 9 p.m., unable to find out anything, Meg called the police. Knowing that Drew worked at Columbia Mall, a police officer was dispatched there. At this point, the mall was already closed. Driving around the parking lot, the officer saw Drew's car. Upon examining it, he found that the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle or any other crime. A black nylon sheath from a folding knife was found on the ground near the car. It wasn't clear yet whether it had anything to do with Drew's disappearance, but such a find was not encouraging. On the seat in the car were papers, a wallet, and a new purse purchased that day, suggesting that even if Drew had faced some dirty deed, it certainly hadn't been a robbery. Neither friends, boyfriend, nor parents knew where Drew might be, so investigators began to lean toward the theory that they were dealing with a kidnapping. First of all, detectives checked out Chris Lang. He was almost immediately ruled out as a suspect because he was in Minnesota, 300 miles from Grand Forks. From Chris, the police learned about the 2 phone calls Drew had made, that one had been abruptly interrupted, and that during the second, made a few hours later, wind noises and the sound of button pressing could be heard. The next day, when the mall where Drew worked opened, the detectives arrived there to review the security camera footage. As it turned out, there were no security cameras in the parking lot where the missing girl's car was parked, but fortunately, there were quite a few security cameras inside the mall. Going through the footage, detectives found a moment when Drew went into one of the local stores after work, where she bought herself a purse. She was calm and in no hurry to go anywhere. She was wearing a pink sweater and was holding a jacket. At 4:55 p.m., Drew paid for her purchase at the register, then put on her jacket and left the store. On her way out, she called Chris. The call was made at exactly 5 p.m., and as we now know, at 5:04 p.m., the conversation between Drew and Chris was abruptly interrupted after she said, "Okay." Knowing that the call was interrupted after 4 minutes, one of the detectives decided to conduct an experiment. Setting the timer for 4 minutes, he began walking slowly from the store where Drew had bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the alarm sounded indicating that 4 minutes had passed, the detective was in the parking lot near where the car had been found. This indicated that something had happened while Drew was at her car. However, as mentioned earlier, there were no cameras overlooking the parking lot, and that made it difficult to investigate. Drew's disappearance attracted media attention, and as a result, a huge number of people learned about what had happened to her, many of whom decided not to remain indifferent to someone else's misfortune. In addition to police officers, over 1,000 volunteers participated in the search for Drew. FBI officers also joined the investigation. The last call that was made from Drew's phone was traced to the small town of Fisher in neighboring Minnesota, which is only a 30-minute drive from the mall where she worked. As you can see on the map, the area around these 2 towns is occupied by fields. Police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to explore these fields. The landowners were asked to check their properties themselves, but unfortunately this was inconclusive, and at first, no leads could be found. The search radius increased with each new day, and 4 days later, an ominous discovery was made. A boot was found under a bridge in the town of Crookston. A roommate noted that on the day of her disappearance, Drew had left the house wearing those boots. Later, the fact that the shoe belonged to the missing girl was confirmed by forensics. Crookston is a small town of less than 10,000 people. It is located about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew disappeared from. Further searches in the Crookston area yielded no results, as there was nothing of investigative interest to be found. A reward of $20,000 was initially offered for information that would help to determine Drew's whereabouts, and then the reward was increased to $140,000. At this point, the only clue that could lead to Drew was the surveillance footage at Columbia Mall. The detectives again sat down to watch hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, but this time they decided to focus their attention not on Drew. They speculated that whoever abducted her may have been following her and may also have been on the videos. The investigators spent hours at the monitors before they saw the person who had caught their attention. They noticed a man walking aimlessly around the mall. He was not buying anything and seemed to be looking more at the people around him than at the merchandise being sold. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit and continued to watch people casually walk past him. After about 10 minutes, he got up from the bench and, wearing black gloves on his hands, walked out into the lobby, where there was a camera hanging overhead, into which he looked. This shot was taken 72 minutes before Drew's conversation with her boyfriend was interrupted, and she disappeared. After watching the man get up from his seat and walk away, investigators noticed that he only did so when a blonde woman walked past him, carrying a grocery cart heading in the direction of the parking lot. Detectives did not consider this a coincidence. Rather, in their opinion, the man seemed to have chosen a suitable victim and followed her. The identity of this woman was unknown, but police were aware that only one person, Drew Shoden, had disappeared from the mall parking lot that day. Given the slight resemblance between Drew and the woman this suspicious man was following, it has been suggested that he had a particular image of the victim. If the kidnapper really was this man, and if for some reason he had failed to kidnap this woman, his next target might have been Drew. She had left the mall around 5 p.m., a time when it was already dark, which might have played into the hands of the perpetrator. At this point in the investigation, there were 3 cities in the case: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where the shoe was found. With this data in mind, the FBI began checking the files of all registered sex offenders from these cities and their environs. Comparing the photos from the files with the image of the suspicious man from the mall, there was only one man who matched all the parameters, and that was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., who had an extensive criminal history of repeated crimes against women. The 50-year-old man had spent the last 23 years behind bars. Rodriguez was the second oldest of 5 children born in Laredo, Texas in February 1953, to migrant workers Dolores and Alfonso Rodriguez Sr. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. claimed to have had an unhappy childhood, describing his home life as unpleasant because his parents were highly critical of him and unreasonable in their demands. His family moved from state to state for 15 years until they finally settled in Crookston in 1963. Rodriguez became increasingly isolated while growing up, which was further compounded by language barriers. His preferred language was Spanish, and he struggled with English, which made school especially challenging. He eventually dropped out of school during the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez claimed that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he said was the source of his hostile feelings against women. In October 1974, at the age of 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead directed her to the driveway in Crookston, where he grabbed her by the throat and tried to force her to please him. The next month, he approached another woman who was sitting in a truck outside of a Crookston movie theater. He threatened her with a knife and ordered her to a secluded spot in the countryside where he forced her to have intercourse with him. Then, in 1979, he tried to kidnap a 69-year-old high school English teacher while she was out walking one night in Crookston. The woman fought back as Rodriguez tried to force her into his car. In a fit of anger, he stabbed her with a knife in her elbow and abdomen, yet she managed to break free and run to safety. The woman, who was artistically talented, was able to draw a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him and led to his capture. He was convicted of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault and sent to prison for 23 years until his release in May 2003. He had been released from prison 6 months before Drew disappeared and was registered as a sex offender of the highest 3rd degree, which meant that his risk of reoffending was as high as possible. Before his release from prison, Rodriguez's family voiced their concerns to Minnesota Department of Corrections officials. Even his family feared that he was going back to his old ways. But despite their fears, Alfonso was released because he had served his entire sentence. After his release, Rodriguez lived with his mother in Crookston, just a couple of miles from the bridge where, it should be recalled, Drew's shoe had been found, which was another factor not in his favor. The detectives decided to talk to Alfonso Rodriguez, and of course, he denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. The man confirmed that he had been at the Columbia Mall the day she disappeared, saying that he had gone to the movie theater and watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico. What he didn't consider was that none of the movie theaters in Grand Forks were showing the movie that day. Police searched Rodriguez's car and realized with regret that Drew was probably no longer alive. It looks at this time like there's no chance we're going to find Drew alive, Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill told reporters. I believe that it is more of a recovery than a rescue mission at this point in time. In Rodriguez's car, dark red dried stains were found in several places in the interior, which forensics later determined were drops of Drew's blood. The affidavit says blood was found on the passenger side rear window and in the back seat, as well as 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The blood did come back. It was a DNA match with Drew from the DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush, the sheriff said. A folding knife was found in the trunk, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot next to Drew's car. A receipt was also found indicating that Rodriguez had purchased this knife, complete with its sheath, from a hardware store located several hundred yards from the parking lot where Drew disappeared. Although Drew was not found alive or dead, investigators gathered enough evidence to charge Rodriguez. 8 days after she disappeared, on December 1, 2003, the man was arrested. Rodriguez, who was imprisoned in a Grand Forks jail, claimed that he was not involved in Drew's disappearance and refused to speak to law enforcement officials or provide information as to her whereabouts despite the evidence against him. During a brief bond hearing several days earlier, bail for Rodriguez's release was set at a staggering $5 million. While he remained silent in custody, the search for Drew continued unabated and focused around these 3 towns. The work of the searchers was made more difficult by the snow that covered the area abundantly. In an unprecedented move, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota pledged during a December 9th press conference to aid in the search for Drew by employing several hundred members of the National Guard and other state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven said that Drew's disappearance was something that has touched every North Dakotan. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty told reporters that he was very proud of the cooperation and the collaboration that's been exhibited by members of the community and police officials. Despite all the efforts made, there were no results, and due to worsening weather conditions, the authorities decided to suspend the search operation. In spring, the intensive search continued. Those searching for Drew hoped they would be able to find her, as the winter snow had just begun to melt. After 5 long months of searching, they were eager to return Drew home. Finally, on April 17, 2004, Drew's body was found. It lay in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from the bridge under which the boot had been found. Drew's family was overwhelmed with grief upon hearing of the heart-wrenching discovery. Her father told reporters, "We were waiting for that call, and when that call came, we all stopped living for a second. It was her parents' worst nightmare, and one that would haunt them for the rest of their lives." The field where the body was found had already been searched, but apparently because of the large drifts, they could not find it immediately. Drew was naked below the waist, which made the motive of the crime obvious. Her hands were tied behind her back, and there was a rope around her neck and a cut. Under the rope were the remnants of a plastic bag, indicating that the bag had first been put over Drew's head and then tied around her neck with a rope. Hair matching Rodriguez's DNA was found on Drew's jacket. Before she died, the young woman had been brutally beaten and stabbed repeatedly. The medical examiner listed 3 possible causes of her death. It was either the cut on her neck, suffocation, or the third possible cause, which was hypothermia. On April 24, 2004, after many months without a word, Drew's family was able to say goodbye to her. About 1,500 people attended the mourning ceremony. North Dakota, where Drew was kidnapped, abolished the death penalty back in 1975. Minnesota, where the body was found, did not use the death penalty as a punishment either. However, because Drew had been transported across state lines, the crime was considered a federal crime, and therefore the prosecutor's office had the right to seek the death penalty for Rodriguez. On August 30, 2006, Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. was convicted in the Drew Shoden case. The jury recommended that he be sentenced to death. On February 8, 2007, Judge Ralph Erickson, during the hearing, told the unconfessing Rodriguez that his senseless and violent actions caused the jury in the court to make a difficult decision. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. became the first person sentenced to death in the state of North Dakota in nearly a century. After 6 years on death row, on June 28, 2013, Rodriguez confessed that he was the one who kidnapped and took Drew's life. However, the story doesn't end there. Ralph Erickson, who had previously been the district judge who sentenced Rodriguez to death, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge, and it was he who in 2021 overturned his own conviction of Rodriguez and ordered a new sentencing phase. Rodriguez's guilt is not in doubt and has been confirmed by various types of DNA testing. In this case, it is the death penalty that is at issue. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing, among other things, the failure of defense attorneys to properly examine Rodriguez's mental health and the testimony of forensic expert Michael McGee, which the judge himself said misled him. This is the expert's testimony, which stated at the time that Rodriguez violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of the abduction. The fact is that there was no direct evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to the judge, the expert gave his opinion, but it was not supported by the facts, which misled the judge and influenced his verdict. Still, in reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that even without the presence of Rodriguez's seminal fluid, the circumstances in which Drew's body was found, naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back, were indicative of a sexually motivated crime. Judge Erickson said that the failure to examine Rodriguez's mental health, both generally and at the time of his crime, was a violation of his constitutional rights. After Rodriguez's death sentence was overturned, the federal prosecutor's office issued a statement saying they would seek the death penalty for him again. However, 2 years later, in 2023, the prosecutors abandoned those plans and accepted that Alfonso Rodriguez's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A statement to that effect was issued, which said, "The United States of America, by Max Schneider, United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota, hereby withdraws the notice of intent to seek a sentence of death against defendant Alfonso Rodriguez, Jr., filed on October 28, 2004, Schneider wrote in a March 14 court filing. The United States no longer intends to seek the death penalty in this case. My thoughts today are with Drew Shoden's family, particularly her parents, Linda Walker and Alan Shoden," said Schneider. "They are genuinely good people and loving parents who, in the wake of an unimaginable loss, have worked closely with our office for nearly 20 years. We continue to wish them the greatest measure of peace possible. I also want to commend the trial team, including former United States Attorney Drew Wrigley, as well as our office's appellate attorneys and support staff. Over the last 2 decades, they have continuously upheld the high standards of the Department of Justice through their work on this tragic case. As a result of their efforts, Mr. Rodriguez is and will remain a convicted murderer. The directive to withdraw the death notice has changed how the United States Attorney's Office will proceed with this case. What will not change is that Mr. Rodriguez will draw his last breath in a federal prison. This case led to changes in sex offender registration laws. On July 27, 2006, President George Bush signed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which included Drew's Law. Drew's Law changed the name of the National Sex Offender Public Registry to the Drew Shoden National Sex Offender Public website, which provides information to the public on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders, regardless of state, territory, or tribal boundaries. On June 22, 2013, news broke that Alfonso Rodriguez had been transferred from death row prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, to Coleman II, a high-security penitentiary in Sumterville, Florida. This is where it looks like he will spend his last days.